The words hit me like a physical blow, stripping the air from my lungs, leaving me cold and hollowed out. 500 million men under arms, the liquidation of 200, 300 million class enemies. My grandmother, my quiet, frail, supposedly Holocaust-escaping grandmother, was not some refugee of Nazi terror. She was a goddamn architect of it, a brutal instrument of a monstrous, world-devouring regime, sent here not to save, but to conquer. The meticulously crafted lies shattered, revealing a horror far deeper and more insidious than I could have ever conceived. My entire perception of reality, already a fragile thing, imploded, replaced by the chilling, undeniable truth. The universe wasn't just indifferent, it was a weapon, and I, a pathetic, unsuspecting fool, had nearly volunteered to be its trigger. That moment, a scream trapped in my throat, was the culmination of weeks of gnawing doubt, years of misplaced trust, and a lifetime of being inexplicably drawn to the dark currents beneath the world's mundane surface. It all began innocently enough, as these things always do, with a quiet request from a dying woman in a sterile hospital room. A woman I barely knew, yet felt an inexplicable pull towards. I've always been drawn to the periphery, to the edges of things. The quiet roads, the late shifts, the towns where no one asks your name. My worn leather jacket, a second skin, has seen more roadside diners and anonymous motels than it has proper homes. It's not a choice so much as a compulsion, a primal need to keep moving, to outrun the phantom chill that always seems to whisper at my heels. I don't know why I'm like this, only that I am. And I've learned, the hard way, that getting too close to anything or anyone is an invitation for the darkness to finally catch up. So, when my grandmother, a woman who treated personal history like classified documents, started to make requests, my internal alarm bells, usually a symphony of paranoia, were surprisingly muted. She was a ghost even before she became one. My paternal grandmother, a private woman, they said, which was family code for her past is a locked vault with no key. German, Silesian, born around 1925. That was the official biography, whispered in hushed tones, patched together from fragments of family lore. The war, we assumed, had been brutal to her. It was a convenient, universal excuse for trauma, a blank slate onto which we projected our own understanding of suffering. She never spoke of it. Not a single detail before the winter of '45 when she snagged my grandfather, a fresh-faced GI, in Bavaria. A quick romance, a quicker trip back to the States in '47. I imagine the desire to escape a shattered continent played a bigger role than the starry-eyed love. And frankly, I didn't blame her. Survival is a powerful motivator. She was sharp, though. Even my grandfather, a man who saw the world in shades of concrete and steel, admitted she was smarter than him. Physics, she'd studied for a few years in university. There were whispers of her knowing John Wheeler and Hugh Everett, names that, even as a teenager, held a certain weight. But she'd abruptly dropped it all in the early 50s, settling into the domesticity of a proper American housewife. My grandfather had apparently tried to talk her out of it, told her not to waste a brain like that. Her response, as retold by my father, was that she was happy with him, didn't need to change the world. It sounded like a line rehearsed 1,000 times. I never bought it. I wasn't close to either set of grandparents, not in the way kids are in sentimental movies. These ones, my paternal side, lived in another state, compounding the distance. And then there was her privacy, a fortress built brick by meticulous brick. But we did share one thing: history, not the grand narratives of our textbooks, but the dusty, forgotten corners, the what-ifs and the might-have-beens. She'd read a book once and recount every minute detail with unnerving accuracy. It was a sharp mind, the kind that could cut glass. Then the cancer came. My grandfather passed, and she moved in with us. A year or two later, the edges of that formidable mind began to fray. We still talked history, but the flawless memory started to slip. Mistakes, small at first, then larger, battles that never were, states that never existed, generals who never commanded. I'd try to correct her, gently, out of habit. Grandmother, I'd say, Lenin's offensive in 1919 stopped at Warsaw. They never reached Prague. Or, Hugenberg was never chancellor. He faded away. She'd nod, a faraway look in her eyes. Right, right. The errors piled up, a subtle wrongness that made my skin prickle, a dissonant chord in the symphony of her sharp intellect. It felt like her mind was not just decaying, but was pulling from an entirely different set of facts. By 2014, my sophomore year of high school, she was in hospice, 90 years old, or so we estimated. She'd never given a precise birthday, never revealed her exact age, just another detail swallowed by the abyss of her past. Our sadness was a grim, stoic thing, like a shared burden more than an outpouring of grief. She wouldn't have wanted blubbering. I remember the day vividly, mid-October. The doctors said her condition had worsened. We sat there, a family unit in a sterile, hushed room, the air thick with antiseptic and the scent of quiet endings. She asked to see us all individually, my parents, my two sisters. I came last. The slow, rhythmic beep of some machine was the only sound as I stepped back into the room, pulling the visitor's chair closer to her bedside. Her eyes, clouded by age and illness, still held a piercing intelligence. Still like history, she rasped, her voice thin, like tissue paper tearing. The German accent, muted over the decades, was more pronounced now, clinging to certain vowels, making weapons sound like weapon. Of course, grandmother, I said. And it was true. My old analog wristwatch, a nervous habit, felt cool against my skin. I checked the time, not out of any real need, but because the silence stretched, heavy and expectant. It was a grounding mechanism, a small, mechanical certainty in a world that felt increasingly fluid. Don't have much time left. It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact. Sure, I know, I replied, equally blunt. We had that in common, a brutal honesty that others mistook for callousness. I wondered if that was why I was her favorite. Or perhaps I was just the most convenient receptacle for her dying wishes. Do me a favor, she said, her gaze fixing on me. The intensity was unsettling. Sure, I agreed, already regretting it. My reluctant conscience, that stubborn, self-destructive spark of decency, was already flickering to life. It's my fatal flaw, the reason I never quite managed to outrun the darkness. She told me to go home, to her room, to the old oak chest in her closet, bring it back to her as soon as I could. An odd request, but not overtly sinister. The chest was old, heavy, dark wood. She'd brought it with her from Germany, a relic from a life she never spoke of. It wasn't locked, but she hadn't told me to open it, and I felt a strange propriety, a silent agreement not to overstep her unspoken boundaries, especially now. The next day, after school, I caught the bus. The chest sat awkwardly on my lap, a dark, anachronistic presence amidst the mundane chatter of other students. The hospital lobby smelled of floor wax and quiet despair. When I brought it into her room, a genuine smile touched her lips, transforming her gaunt face. A true smile, not just the polite curve of the mouth she usually managed. It gave me a jolt. Open it, she said, the smile fading into something more serious. I did. The hinges creaked, a dry, protesting sound in the hushed room. Inside, a few items. On top, a black and white photograph, surprisingly crisp. A young woman, pretty, with her hair pulled back in a tight braid, smiling. She wore a uniform I didn't recognize. Her arms were clasped behind her back, obscuring most of the insignia on her shoulder. but I could make out a narrowed point and two convergent lines. Maybe some kind of flower? "Grandmother, what uniform is this?" I asked, a tremor of unease starting in my gut. My observational instincts, honed by years of scanning for the subtle wrongness, were starting to hum. "Lift the next item." Her voice was sharper, dismissive of my question. It was heavy, wrapped in greasy, old rags. My fingers fumbled, the cloth slipping, and then I saw it. A pistol. An old service-issue revolver, dull metal, well-worn grip. I nearly dropped it, shoving it back into the chest, my head snapping up, scanning the door. Firearms were definitely not allowed in hospitals. The thought was absurd. "Grandmother, why do you have a weapon here?" I hissed, my voice barely a whisper. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, suddenly charged. "My old service weapon," she replied, the German accent thick now, as if shedding years of careful suppression. "What service? You were a soldier. For who?" This was beyond the anecdotes of a mild-mannered housewife. She looked at me, her eyes surprisingly clear, completely lucid. "I'm going to tell you a story I don't think you will believe, but perhaps these things in the box will make it easier for you to believe." And then she laid it out, point blank. She wasn't from this world, not our Silesia, not our 1920s. We sat there for hours. Her voice, thin and raspy, never faltered. No dementia now, no slips of the tongue. Every detail sharp, precise. It was a chilling performance. The gist was this. In her world, the Nazis rose. We started late. Hitler steamrolled Europe, then the USSR. By the early 1950s, after grinding down the British, he'd invaded and occupied the British Isles. She, a resistance fighter, fled from Germany to Soviet Russia, then to Britain, then to South Africa, always running, always fighting. The uniform? Joint Committee of Military Sciences, a collaboration of governments in exile. She'd been a physics student, recruited for their research and development. Days grew darker. Nazis took French Africa, then assaulted South Africa. Victory was a pipe dream. But then, a Russian scientist, she never named him, discovered parallel worlds. Infinitely many, and crucially, how to move between them. "Take the papers out of the box," she ordered. I did. Thin, onion-skin papers, covered in wild, impossible equations, intricate blueprints. My Algebra 2 brain barely registered the numbers. Only the sheer complexity, the alien logic of it all. It meant nothing to me, a kid struggling to keep a C. This was the plan, she said. Her world was lost. They would send one person, all the primitive machine could handle, to another world. Our world, World 38, they called it. A world that had defeated the Nazis. A world that knew the horrors of Nazi victory. She would bring the blueprints. Once here, she'd convince our generals and statesmen. Our scientists would improve the transporter, make it capable of bringing millions. Then, our armies would march into hers, liberate it forever. She'd stepped into the machine, she claimed, as artillery rained on Johannesburg, Waffen-SS battering the gates. Her colleagues would destroy it after she went through. Only the schematics would remain. She'd stepped in, not knowing if it would work, if she'd die or worse. She'd saluted her comrades. The room shook under the payload of Nazi warplanes. But it worked. She stepped out in our world. Spring 1945. The Third Reich was crumbling. Hitler was dead. A near utopia for her. Her mission, reconstruct the machine, liberate her world. That's why she'd come to America. Sought out physicists like Everett. But it was hopeless. No one believed her. No one took her seriously. So, she gave up, settled for a quiet life with my grandfather. And I believed her. Every word. How could I not? She was an old woman, dying. She wasn't one for elaborate lies or teasing. The tears in her eyes, those were real. The photograph, the uniform, The blueprints. What other explanation could there be? My heart broke for her. No wonder she'd been so sullen, so private. Somewhere out there, her world suffered, languishing under the jackboot. She was their last hope, and she'd failed. Were they still waiting? But she gripped my wrist then, her frail fingers surprisingly strong, digging into my skin. My wristwatch felt cold under her touch. It may still come. Listen, I'll be dead soon, but not you. Take the plans. Take the box. She begged. Her eyes, filled with an ancient, desperate light, held mine. Please, one day, see that the machine is built. You must, whatever it takes. Billions of women and children across eternity beg rescue. Please do not fail like I did. Liberating a parallel universe from Nazi occupation. A hell of a responsibility to lay on a 15-year-old kid who barely managed to get his laundry done. But her desperation was contagious. Choked up. What could I say? I'll try. Grandmother, there was one more thing in the box. Another stack of papers, covered in florid German handwriting, intricate, looping letters that were illegible to my untrained eye. What are these? I asked. She sat up sharply, a flicker of raw panic in her eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a strained nonchalance. My private writing, she said, forcing a casual tone. Please burn them, and do it soon. I do not wish for them to survive me. Sure, grandmother. The words felt hollow. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Her urgency, that fleeting look of terror, screamed at me. She wanted these gone for a reason, and it wasn't out of modesty, some deep-seated instinct, that little voice that always warns me when something is irrevocably wrong, told me not to. I said goodbye, the antiseptic tang of the room burning my nose. I embraced her, tears stinging my own eyes. 5 days later, she was gone. I didn't know what to do. She'd sworn me to secrecy, build a great machine. Me, a kid who couldn't even put together an IKEA bookshelf without breaking a sweat, let alone ripping holes in space-time between debate tournaments. As weeks turned to months, as her body went into the ground, my certainty wavered. I didn't disbelieve her, not completely, but it was all so insane. Maybe she had just gone mad with age. It was a comforting thought, a way to dismiss the impossible burden she'd placed on me. And yet, the box stayed, hidden. The blueprints. I spent hours poring over them, trying to make sense of the equations, the schematics. They never became any clearer. Numbers, square roots, calculations that might have been the height of genius or might have been absolute nonsense. I couldn't say. The years passed. The box, a silent reproach, gathered dust in the back of my closet, a physical manifestation of a forgotten, terrifying duty. I never forgot, but there was little I could do. So I put it aside. Until recently, I was in my final year of university, close to graduation. With apologies to my grandmother, I hadn't majored in physics, history, actually, old habits, I suppose, died hard. I wasn't thinking of her, not really, until a term paper brought her back. 20th century European dictatorships, Nazi Germany, Stalinist Soviet Union. I was knee-deep in the euphemisms of horror, special actions for mass murder, liberation for brutal conquest and execution. It was soul-numbing, a grim reminder of humanity's boundless capacity for cruelty. It was flipping through one such morbid source, a collection of documents on the NKVD, Stalin's secret police, that my grandmother returned, sharp and sudden, to my mind. The little box, always with me, always hidden. I kept it close. It wasn't my go bag, but it was another anchor to a past I couldn't quite shake. And then it hit me. I was in university. I wasn't a physicist, but there were brilliant minds here. Mathematicians, even, at least a few, I knew who had published on multiverse theories. If my grandmother wasn't insane, if I truly did have some duty to free her homeworld, where better to start than here? I went back to my apartment, a transient space that felt more like a temporary holding cell than a home, and retrieved the box. It felt heavier than I remembered, imbued with years of silent, terrifying potential. The first thing that caught my eye were her private writings. I felt a pang of shame. I hadn't burned them. I couldn't. Some deep-seated instinct, a whisper of dread, had held me back. Now, curiosity, a dangerous thing, took hold. I was going to go to a certain physics professor, a self-proclaimed many-worlder, and broach the insanity gently. But my grandmother's private writings returned again and again to my thoughts. Finally, I decided I would read them. I asked her forgiveness beyond the grave, a cynical prayer on my lips. But I rationalized it. I needed to know exactly what was going on. Her writings might illuminate things, except I couldn't read them. German, and not just German, but florid, looping German script that would have made even English difficult for me. My hope deflated, leaving a bitter taste. So, I did what any desperate, ignorant fool would do. I took them to someone who could, a girl I knew, a friend of a friend, really, foreign languages major, fluent in German. Her name was Anya. She had bright, curious eyes and a smile that had clearly never seen the kind of darkness I carried. She asked me what they were, pointed out how old they looked. I tried to deflect, to spin a story. Speculative fiction, I said, trying to sound casual, like I often did when lying. Written from the point of view of a young woman sent from a world nearly conquered by the Nazis, to ours, in hopes of rescuing her own universe. She quirked an eyebrow. If you could clearly write fluently in German, what did you need me for? I hadn't thought that far ahead. The lie, flimsy as it was, collapsed. I didn't write it, I admitted. It's complicated. Just please, tell me what it says. My voice was tight. My wristwatch, unseen, was being frantically tapped by my thumb. She shrugged, a gesture of casual acceptance. Then she began to read. Her voice, clear and uninflected, filled my small, anonymous apartment, imbuing the ancient script with a terrifying new life. She finished quickly. There were only about 5 pages. She looked up at me, a blank, almost bored expression on her face. She thought it was just a story, after all. Well, she said, her brow furrowing slightly, it doesn't seem like it's written in a world where Hitler wins. It looks like it's written in a world where Stalin wins. That threw me for a loop. The floor tilted. A cold, heavy pit formed in my stomach, dragging me down. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate trapped bird. I asked her to elaborate, to slow down, to tell me what she meant. She said it was a letter from a general of the NKVD, the Soviet secret police, addressed to a subordinate, Comrade Colonel Maria Messer, my grandmother. These weren't her private writings at all. They were writings addressed to her, orders. Anya continued, her voice oblivious to the cosmic horror she was unleashing. In the world of the story, it seemed the Soviet Union had established control over the entire planet. References to Mexican, Yoruba, German, Kurdish, Japanese, even New England Soviet republics. Not enough information to reveal precisely how, but somehow, mankind was subject to a globe-spanning Stalinist dictatorship. I still hardly understood. My grandmother had lied? About her world? About her? A colonel of Stalin's secret police? My palms were sweating, a cold, clammy film. I could feel my pulse throb in my temples. Read on, I croaked. Anya read the final paragraph, her voice calm, utterly unaware of the abyss opening before my feet. The letter spoke nothing of bringing armies from our world to liberate hers. Rather, it spoke of bringing armies from her world into ours. The photograph, the uniform, the insignia. The narrowed point and two converging lines, the fringes. It slammed into me then. The true meaning of the shapes I'd vaguely noted. It wasn't a flower. It was the edge of a red star, enclosing a hammer and sickle, the symbol of a global, totalitarian empire. And at last I realized I'd been played for a fool, a patsy. I realized there had never been any Nazi-ruled dystopia. I realized why my grandmother, my supposedly frail, benevolent grandmother, had wanted me to burn these papers. Why she had not wanted me to read them. I realized why she so badly wanted this great machine built, because the letter finished thusly. Remember, Comrade Messer, the world you are going into is one still stuck firmly in the age of capitalist darkness. This shall be the fifth world besides our own, we free forever from the strictures of capitalist production. I cannot stress enough the importance of the machines being built to specifications. We sent you through on a prototype, but the machine whose construction you oversee in World 38 must be exponentially superior. It must be capable of bringing through from our world, at the very least, several hundred fronts worth of Red Army soldiers, some 500 million men under arms. This, our analysts estimate, will be the minimum necessary for the military defeat of World 38, the liquidation of all class enemies and counter-revolutionaries, estimated to be some 300 million total, the pacification of all hostile populations, and finally, the true and total liberation of this world and its peoples. Much luck, comrade. My world, our world. World 38 was not to be saved. It was to be invaded, conquered, liberated. And I, Leo Vance, had been nearly coerced into building the gate for the invaders, the cold, unseen shadow that had always followed me, the one that made me keep moving, suddenly had a name, a face, and a horrifyingly clear purpose. It was not just behind me anymore. It was everywhere. And it was coming. Total character count, 9879. Its eyes, black and ancient, locked onto mine. 40 feet of scale dread, rippling with primordial hunger, coiled at the water's edge. And I knew, with a certainty colder than the ocean itself, that I was next. A guttural snarl vibrated in the air, a promise of teeth and oblivion. As it began to move, its colossal shadow falling over the sand, intent on claiming its next meal, my meal. But that moment, raw and primal, was the terrifying culmination of a day that had started with an ill-advised desire for a sliver of peace. A day that had been wrong from the first salty breath of coastal air. The relentless drone of the bus had been a form of sensory deprivation, the hum a dull lullaby of my self-imposed exile. Another overnight haul, another forgotten highway. My worn leather jacket, an extension of my skin, felt heavier than usual in the muggy coastal air of Port Horizon, a false comfort against the alien warmth. Even in the dead of winter, the cold often felt more honest, more predictable than this oppressive, humid embrace. I checked my analog wristwatch, a nervous tick more than a functional glance. The hands hadn't moved in hours, but my thumb traced the smooth, cool glass anyway. Old habits, harder to shake than a shadow. Port Horizon, a postcard town, sounded like a place where people came to forget their troubles. My troubles, however, were less forgotten and more just, temporarily misplaced, lurking in the periphery, always ready to claw their way back into the foreground. I was supposed to drop off a shipment of something uninteresting, probably cheap plastic trinkets for tourist traps, and then pick up another cargo before sunrise. A few hours of downtime, time I usually spent holed up in a greasy diner or a forgotten corner of a truck stop, nursing black coffee and the kind of existential dread that made the lukewarm brew taste like ambrosia. But today, the salty air, thick with the smell of brine and something vaguely metallic, rust, had tugged at something dormant within me. A flicker of a memory, perhaps, of a time before the world had cracked open and swallowed my innocence whole, a stupid, dangerous impulse to walk. I walked, not with any destination in mind, but just to feel the ground beneath my feet, to stretch limbs stiff from too many hours behind the wheel. The boardwalk was a cacophony of shrieks and laughter, the synthetic smell of fried dough and cheap cologne assaulting my senses. I hated it. People en masse were always a liability, a statistical probability for something to go wrong. Every face was a potential mask, every smile a possible prelude to a scream. I remembered Ethan, his charming grin, the way he'd offered me a ride, only to reveal the gnawing hunger beneath his skin. Or Olivia, her pristine home, her polished manners, and the horror of what lay beneath the rug. No, crowds were not my preferred company. I veered off the main drag, following a faded sign that promised public beach access, but looked more like a forgotten path to a forgotten stretch of sand. The path dissolved into soft, yielding sand, the kind that sucked at your shoes with every step. To my right, a line of squat, sun-bleached condos eventually tapered off, replaced by a wall of natural rock, a low cliff face that rose steadily, gaining height as I walked. It was quieter here, the distant echoes of the boardwalk fading into the rhythmic hush of the waves. This was better. Less chance of accidentally stumbling into someone else's nightmare. For a moment, a fleeting, foolish moment, I almost allowed myself to relax. Almost. My internal alarm system, permanently wired to maximum alert since that night at Sycamore Grove, just wouldn't quit. It was a phantom itch beneath my ribs, a whisper of static in my ears, telling me that peace was a lie, a temporary reprieve before the next boot dropped. Then I saw them, figures silhouetted against the bright sky atop the cliff. 3, maybe 4 of them. They moved with a strange, jerky cadence, like puppets on tangled strings. My first thought, the immediate cynical one, was that they were idiots, drunks, probably playing some kind of idiotic dare. Cliff diving was dangerous enough, but from that height into these waves, pure suicide. I considered turning around, putting some distance between myself and whatever stupidity was about to unfold. Common sense, a skill I'd cultivated through years of forced practice, screamed at me to bolt. But then, my fatal flaw, that reluctant damn conscience, kicked in. The one that whispers, what if? The one that makes me slow down, observe, and inevitably get tangled up in things that are none of my business. The one that had led me to help Mitch, only for him to turn into a skin-wearing horror from the walls. I hated that part of me. I stopped, my eyes narrowing, trying to make sense of the scene. They weren't jumping, not even a graceful dive, not a hesitant step. They were being pushed. I saw it clearly then. 3 men, burly and indistinct against the glare, seizing another figure, a smaller one, by the arms and shoulders. There was a brief struggle, a flailing of limbs, a muted cry carried away by the wind, and then a grotesque heave. The figure tumbled, a rag doll against the blue, and disappeared into the churning water below. A muffled splash, lost in the roar of the surf. My breath hitched. This wasn't a dare. This was a murder. My gut clenched, a cold, hard knot of dread forming in my stomach. The phantom smell of smoke, the acrid scent of burning wood and flesh, tickled the back of my throat. Sycamore Grove, always there, a burnout ruin in the landscape of my mind. I dropped to a crouch, instinctively seeking cover behind a cluster of sun-warmed boulders, their rough surfaces gritting against the worn leather of my jacket. The sand, still hot from the afternoon sun, prickled through my jeans. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drum solo of pure, unadulterated terror. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the oxygen had been leached out, replaced by something denser, something metallic. I felt a familiar shiver crawl up my spine, a sensation that had become as common as breathing since I'd left that mountain pass, left the whispers of the phantom hitchhiker behind. This wasn't just human evil. There was a wrongness to the air, a preternatural chill despite the heat, like the calm before a storm, or the silence before a beast lunged. I risked a peek, my head barely clearing the top of the boulder, my eyes scanning the cliff top. The three men were still there, dark silhouettes, motionless, like grotesque statues. They weren't looking around for witnesses. They were looking down, fixated on the water below, watching, waiting. For what? The thought curdled in my stomach. They'd just thrown a man to his presumed death, and they were just observing? The sheer, callous indifference was a cold jab, reminding me of the countless times I'd seen humanity at its worst, the casual cruelty that could blossom in the most mundane settings. Ethan, again, the normal facade, the monstrous core. Then, from the water, from the very spot where the first man had vanished, came a scream. Not a human scream, not quite. It was choked, gurgling, abruptly cut short, a sound that tore at the fabric of the air, ripping through the rhythmic crash of the waves. My head snapped back to the water just in time to see a violent, sickening geyser of blood and foam erupt from the surface. It was a crimson stain blooming on the blue-green canvas of the ocean, a sickeningly beautiful, horrifying spectacle. The second man, the one who had just been pushed, was backstroking furiously, frantically, away from the point of eruption, his face a mask of primal, uncomprehending terror. He was trying to get away from whatever had just happened to the first, but his movements were sluggish, heavy, as if fighting against an unseen current. My eyes darted, trying to comprehend, trying to focus, but the sheer, visceral horror of the scene overwhelmed my senses. The first man was gone, utterly, completely gone. The water where he had fallen was calm again, save for the spreading bloom of red. The second man, gasping, half drowning, somehow made it to a cluster of barnacle-encrusted rocks near the base of the cliff. He clawed at them, desperate, scrabbling for purchase, his limbs flailing. He was trapped, nowhere to go. The men on the cliff top were still watching, silent, detached. Their patience was chilling, an almost predatory stillness. They weren't murderers. They were offering, it seemed, sacrifices. The thought made a cold tremor run through my entire body, a deeper chill than any winter night. This wasn't just a random act of violence. There was a method to this madness, a ritualistic undertone that hummed just beneath the surface of my understanding, like a low-frequency hum that rattles your teeth without you knowing why. Then it came, faster than thought, faster than a blink, a sudden, violent disruption of the water near the climbing man. No roar, no warning, just a ripple that became a surge, and then a sleek, impossibly black head erupted from the depths. It was enormous, larger than a man, with scales that seemed to absorb the light, jaws impossibly wide, snapped open, revealing a terrifying array of needle-sharp teeth, glinting wetly in the sun. It was like something torn from a nightmare, something that shouldn't exist, something that defied the very laws of reality. The head lunged, a blur of motion, and the man on the rocks, still scrabbling, still trying to climb, was simply gone. The jaws closed, a wet, sickening thud, and the thrashing ceased. The water around the boulder, already stained, erupted into a vibrant, ghastly crimson, churning like a witch's brew. There was no splash this time, just a silent, brutal consumption. My stomach churned, threatening to revolt. The taste of bile rose in my throat. I recoiled, pressing myself deeper into the embrace of the rough rock, trying to become one with the shadow. My heart was a frantic hummingbird in my chest, a desperate, rapid fluttering that threatened to burst out. I risked another glance at the cliff top. The men up there, those cold, detached bastards who had just thrown lives away, were no longer detached. Shock had finally etched itself onto their faces, a grotesque parody of fear. They stumbled back, eyes wide, mouths agape. They looked just as horrified as I felt, which was baffling. They had just committed murder, had supplied the victims, but this was clearly beyond their expectations. It was a chilling realization. They were playing a game they didn't fully understand, or perhaps they understood it too late. They were still watching, still rooted to the spot, drawn by the same morbid fascination that held me captive, a horrifying shared moment of witnessing something impossible, something that shattered the very concept of a safe world. It dragged me back to the feeling of standing at the edge of that dark road, seeing something that wasn't there, knowing the impossible was real. The phantom hitchhiker, a precursor to this primal terror. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. The only sound was the relentless, indifferent crash of the waves against the shore. And then, ripples, large, disturbing, concentric rings spreading from the crimson-stained water. Whatever had just devoured those men was moving, swimming, closer to shore. My eyes were glued to the water, a morbid fascination warring with the desperate need to run. It was a struggle, a paralysis born of pure, unadulterated fear. My body screamed for motion, for escape, but my mind was stuck, caught in the awful beauty of the unfolding horror. This was it. This was the moment I got eaten. Another entry in the Leo Vance's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day ledger. This was the end of the road. No heaven, no escape, just a monstrous maw. The farm in the sky, a predator's dream. Slowly, impossibly, it broke the surface. First the sleek, black snout, then the broad, flat head, followed by the hulking mass of its body. It crawled out of the water, not with the awkwardness I expected, but with a surprising, deliberate grace. It was truly immense, at least 40 feet long, maybe more, a living shadow against the sun-drenched sand. Its skin was like polished obsidian, stretched taut over a frame that resembled a monstrous Komodo dragon, but elongated, streamlined for the water. A massive, paddle-like tail, easily half its body length, propelled it forward. Its legs, bent and powerful, ended in clawed feet that dug into the sand, leaving deep, dragging furrows. It was an apex predator, perfectly evolved for its domain. My mind, ever analytical, even in the face of absolute terror, cataloged the details. The way its joints articulated, the texture of its scales, the sheer, impossible scale of it. It was real, too real. It stopped at the water's edge, its powerful body a dark, unholy silhouette against the blinding sky. Its head held high, began to twitch, its nostrils flaring. It was sniffing the air, searching, and then, with a slow, deliberate movement that spoke of ancient, calculating hunger, it threw its head back, pointing its long, reptilian snout straight up. The action revealed more of its terrifying maw, rows upon rows of those needle-sharp teeth, glistening like bone shards, hanging out of its jaw, too numerous to count. It was a perfect, monstrous instrument of death. And then it turned its head, slowly. Those ancient, black eyes, deeper than any ocean trench, fixed on the cliff top. The men, still frozen in their terror, suddenly seemed to snap out of their stupor, flinching back, as if the creature's gaze alone could burn them to ash. And then it shifted its gaze, lower, sweeping across the beach, straight at me, at the cluster of boulders where I lay, trying to disappear, trying to become nothing. I had been spotted by the monster and by the men on the cliff, whose eyes, now wide with a fresh surge of terror, followed the beast's gaze to my hiding place. Great. Just great. Another Tuesday. The monster, apparently weighing its options, seemed to conclude that the lone, exposed figure on the sand was a far easier meal than the group of humans perched high on the rocks. No accounting for taste, I thought, a desperate black humor bubbling up from the abyss of my fear. It began to move, its massive body lumbering towards me, a surprisingly clumsy gait on the soft sand. Its tail, an impressive tool for aquatic propulsion, now seemed to be a hindrance, dragging heavily, making it slow. Hope, a fragile, dangerous thing, flickered within me. I had a chance. My legs, despite the bone-deep terror that wanted to root me to the spot, responded. I scrambled up, muscles screaming in protest, and bolted. Sand flew up behind me in miniature explosions as I ran, a desperate, graceless flight. I glanced over my shoulder, the sheer reptilian bulk of the creature, a horrifying presence behind me. Yes, it was clumsy. Every step was a struggle for it, its heavy tail digging into the sand like an anchor. It wasn't built for land pursuit, thank God. My own running was hardly Olympic level, the soft sand robbing me of momentum. But at least I wasn't carrying an extra 20 feet of tail. My lungs burned, my vision tunneled, but I kept pushing, the primal fear of being a meal driving every ragged breath, every stumbling stride. The monster, ancient cunning gleaming in its dark eyes, seemed to realize its terrestrial disadvantage. Its clumsy pursuit faltered. Then, with a surprisingly fluid motion, it veered left, back towards the water. I didn't slow down, but I watched, a sickening realization dawning on me. Ripples, swift and disturbing, appeared in the water, moving parallel to my position, but much, much faster. It was paralleling me, but gaining ground. My breath hitched. It was going to cut me off. It was going to emerge ahead of me, a dark, living barrier between me and the distant, sun-drenched town, a place that suddenly felt like salvation. The monster was smart, too smart. It was almost like it knew what I was doing, what my next move would be. A chilling thought, reminiscent of the thing that had worn Mitch's face, that had known my thoughts, my fears, from inside the walls of my own safe haven. No, not a chance. Not today. My instinct for survival, honed by years of running from the unexplainable, kicked in. I veered sharply, cutting perpendicular to my current trajectory, heading directly inland, towards the distant, hazy outline of the town, towards the cluster of buildings and the faint murmur of human noise. The sand here was a little firmer, a little less yielding, and I pushed harder, my chest burning, the salt taste of sweat mingling with the metallic tang of fear in my mouth. This was it, a sprint for my life. The beach stretching endlessly seemed to mock me, every grain of sand a tiny, treacherous obstacle. Behind me, 50 feet or so from where I would have been had I kept my course, the monster erupted from the water again, a dark, colossal shape. It clawed its way onto the sand, its head whipping around, its eyes narrowing as it registered my change in direction. It snarled, a guttural, wet sound that vibrated through the air. Even at that distance, pissed off, I thought, a sardonic, weary laugh bubbling up despite the terror. It realized it had been outsmarted, if only for a moment. It hesitated, its body tense, then slid back into the water with a resentful splash, turning to watch me, a reptilian hunter studying its prey, like an alligator. Exactly. Patient, cunning, deadly. But I had bought myself a precious few seconds. I didn't stop running. Not really, but I slowed, allowing my gasping lungs to pull in ragged breaths. My legs felt like lead, my muscles screaming in protest. I kept glancing back, expecting to see those black eyes, that sleek head, breach the surface again, but it remained in the water, a dark, silent sentinel. The snarl, those needle teeth, were still visible, a promise of violence held in abeyance. It probably thought it had me, that I would eventually exhaust myself. And it wasn't wrong. I was spent, physically and emotionally. The adrenaline was starting to drain. leaving me trembling, hollowed out. I wiped a hand across my brow, gritty with sand and sweat. My wristwatch, forgotten in the chase, felt heavy on my wrist. I needed a plan. Something, anything. This was a new flavor of monster, one I hadn't encountered before. But the rules were always the same. If it's big and wants to eat you, it's probably not interested in a nuanced conversation about your feelings. My hand, still shaking, fumbled for the zipper of my backpack. My go bag was always packed, a basic survival kit. But I wasn't in a situation for a first aid kit or a flashlight. What I needed was a distraction. Something stupid. Something impulsive. My fingers closed around the absurdly heavy, perfectly sculpted chocolate lighthouse I'd bought earlier from a ridiculously quaint candy store near the bus station. A moment of weakness, a foolish attempt to cling to some semblance of normalcy, to pretend that I was a tourist, a human being on vacation, not a magnet for cosmic horrors. Now, perhaps, it could be my salvation. I ripped open the foil, the sweet scent of cocoa momentarily cutting through the briny air. It was a good, solid piece of chocolate. Heavy. I wound back, ignoring the protesting muscles in my shoulder, and threw it as hard as I could. A desperate, clumsy arc towards the water, aiming for a spot a good distance down the beach, away from my current path. It splashed into the water, a satisfying plunk that seemed loud in the sudden, suspended silence. The monster's head, which had been fixed on me with unwavering intensity, now swiveled. Its nostrils flared, twitching. The scent, I imagined, carried on the breeze. A sweet, unfamiliar aroma in its domain of salt and blood. Slowly, ponderously, it began to swim towards the chocolate lighthouse. It moved with a renewed purpose, its massive body cutting through the water with effortless power. It breached the surface near the chocolate, its sleek head dipping down, its snake-like tongue flickering out, tasting the strange, dark lump. It must have liked it, because with a surprisingly gentle motion for such a colossal beast, it picked up the chocolate lighthouse in its massive jaws. For a surreal moment, it looked like a monstrous, scaly dog with a treasured bone. Then away with a final, satisfied, almost playful flip of its tail, it turned and slid back into the deeper water, disappearing beneath the waves, a dark ripple in the endless blue. Gone. For now. I didn't wait around for an encore. The monster might have a sweet tooth, but I wasn't about to test its patience. My legs were burning, lungs screaming, but I forced myself to move, one stumbling step after another, putting as much distance as possible between myself and that stretch of haunted beach. I had to get back to the bus, get out of this town, get back on the road. The road, as terrifying and lonely as it could be, at least offered the illusion of escape. The open highway, a blank canvas of anonymity. Is for the men on the cliff? They were still up there, probably shitting themselves, finally understanding the true nature of the beast they'd been feeding. Did I owe it to the world to report them? My cynical side said no. Let them deal with their own hell. But the reluctant conscience, that nagging voice that never shut up, told me I had to do something. Even if it was just a token gesture, I found a small, shabby diner near the bus station, the kind that smelled of stale coffee in desperation. A rotary phone, a relic, hung on the wall near the sticky counter. My hands were still shaking as I lifted the receiver, the plastic cool against my clammy skin. I dialed 911, the numbers feeling alien beneath my trembling fingers. Yes, I said, my voice rough. I need to report an incident. On the private beach, near the cliffs, south of town. I paused and carefully choosing my words. I saw some men pushing others into the water, and there was a lot of blood. They hit the rocks. I think I omitted the 40-foot Komodo dragon with a taste for chocolate. Who would believe me? They'd lock me up, or worse, they'd send me to a padded room, just like they always tried to do. And I had enough shadows chasing me without adding the men in white coats to the mix. The woman on the other end was professional, dispassionate. "Sir, can you describe the men?" "No," I lied, my gaze sweeping the empty diner. "It was too far. Just get someone out there." There were bodies, or what was left of them. I hung up, the click of the receiver echoing in the small space. My job was done. My reluctant conscience, appeased for the moment, settled back into its uneasy slumber. I ordered a black coffee, scalding hot, hoping it would burn away the taste of fear, the lingering scent of blood and brine. The world continued to turn, oblivious. And I, Leo Vance, the haunted everyman, the weary wanderer, was still standing, still surviving, still running, always running. My hand went to my watch, checking the time that wasn't there, a small, meaningless ritual in a world that had long since stopped making sense. The thing sitting inside my tent, where I had been moments before, was me, or it was a mockery of me, a grotesque parody stitched together from fear and shadow. Its skin, stretched parchment thin over sharp bone, had the pallor of a drowned man, and its too wide grin, a rictus of sheer malevolence, seemed to tear its face from ear to ear. But it was the eyes that truly froze the blood in my veins, not the tired green I knew, but bottomless pits of obsidian, utterly, completely black, each weeping a single, viscous drop of what looked like tar or ancient, clotted blood. It just sat there, legs folded impossibly beneath it, leaning back on one skeletal hand, watching me, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. A low, wet chuckle gurgled from its throat, a sound that twisted the very air. And then, slowly, deliberately, a hand that was not my hand, all long, spindly fingers and stretched knuckles, reached out from the tense gaping maw. My scream, when it finally tore from my throat, was a sound ripped from the raw, exposed core of a man who had seen too much. It had all started, as these things always did, with a desperate search for an ending, or perhaps a beginning. I was wallowing in the kind of soul-crushing depression that coated everything in a layer of invisible dust, muffling the world until it felt like I was perpetually underwater. Days bled into weeks, each one a sluggish tide of apathy and suicidal ideation. I'd spend hours staring at the cracks in the ceiling, fantasizing about stepping in front of an 18-wheeler or taking that final, irreversible plunge from a forgotten bridge. Enough was enough. I had to do something, anything, to jolt myself awake, to sever the invisible cord that seemed to be slowly strangling the last spark of life from my chest. A friend, one of the few I still tolerated, and who, bless his oblivious heart, still tolerated me, had suggested solo camping. "Clear your head, Vance," he chirped, probably picturing me communing with nature like some damn mystic. Wilderness, silence, solitude, do you good. He'd even given me a list of spots, some more isolated than others. Naturally, with the kind of self-destructive impulse that had defined my life for far too long, I picked the most isolated one, a patch of forgotten earth about a 3-hour hike from the last established campsite, deep in the maw of the Rocky Mountain National Forest. I was looking for silence, yes, but also, perhaps, oblivion, a place where the world couldn't find me, and maybe, just maybe, I couldn't find myself either, or at least, the parts of myself I hated most. I remembered my brother's smirk, the way he'd practically held my worn leather jacket hostage, spouting off an endless, melodramatic list of things I should be scared of. Skinwalkers, witches, werewolves. Oh my, he'd sing-songed, trying to inject some levity, some sense into my thick skull. He'd laid out reason after reason why this whole idea was stupid. A death wish in flannel, told me I still had time to flake out, save face, I just rolled my eyes, snatched my jacket, my old friend, more a second skin now than mere clothing, from his grasp, and slid into the driver's seat of my beat-up sedan. "I ain't scared of nothing," I'd yelled, my voice ringing with a bravado I didn't feel, before peeling away toward the darkening outline of the mountains. They loomed against the setting sun like teeth, like the serrated jaw of some ancient, patient predator. Boy, how I wished I'd listened. I was wrong. He was right. I was, as I would soon discover, absolutely, terrifyingly, fucking scared. More scared than I had ever been in my life, which, for a man with my particular history, was saying something. The drive up the mountains, at first, was strangely soothing. The road, a ribbon of asphalt unspooling through pine-scented air, wound its way through ancient trees and up the granite flanks of the peaks. It was engaging enough to navigate, a welcome distraction. And soon, the relentless static in my mind began to ease. I decided to forego electronics entirely for this trip. My phone was locked away in the glove box, a digital dead weight. I wanted to be completely free of all that shit, able to focus on the now, on the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other, rather than ruminating about a past that always seemed to follow me like a hungry shadow, or fearing a future that stretched out, bleak and uncertain. I was supposed to be gone for 5 days and 4 nights, enough time, I'd foolishly hoped, to recuperate, reassess my life, and maybe even figure out what the hell I was doing with it. Like some fresh air and a few nights under canvas could exorcise the demons that had taken up permanent residence in my head. Another laughably naive thought. I descended into Estes Park, a postcard town nestled at the foot of the Giants, and drove through its picturesque streets towards the RMP entrance. I willed myself not to make a detour to the historic Stanley Hotel, a place with its own brand of quiet dread. A different kind of haunt, but one I'd rather avoid. Found the park entrance easily enough, then continued to the closest lot to my planned campsite. Night was falling fast, painting the sky in bruised purples and blood oranges, and I cursed myself for leaving so late. I sat in the car for a good 30 minutes, drumming my fingers on the steering wheel, before deciding that hiking 3 hours in near pitch black through unknown wilderness was not just risky, but outright suicidal. Even for me. My hand instinctively went to my old analog wristwatch, a nervous tick. No real reason to check the time, just a need for something tangible, something predictable, in a world that rarely was. There were 4 other tents already set up in the lot, with room for one more. Soon enough, my own flimsy dome of nylon and aluminum poles stood proud among them. That night passed surprisingly comfortably. I was surrounded by the sounds of normal human existence, chatting, laughing people, unruly but happy children who ran screaming through the thin mountain air. A few of them, perhaps pitying my solitary figure, offered me roasted hot dogs, s'mores, and even a couple of beers. I filled my belly with cheap comforts, the temporary warmth spreading through me, and for a few short hours, I even managed a genuine smile. I was rolled up in my sleeping bag, lost to the merciful darkness of sleep, before the last light from the dying embers of the communal fire faded away. The second night didn't go so smoothly, not by a long shot. I woke up late, well-rested but still groggy, the kind of heavy-limbed lethargy that sleep couldn't entirely banish. I took my sweet time repacking my tent, folding the sleeping bag, rolling up the pad. I hesitated, a strong current of inertia pulling me towards simply staying put. The thought of another night surrounded by the comforting din of other campers was seductive. But then, around 3 p.m., another family showed up, armed with proof they'd reserved the site. My brief reprieve from solitude was over. So, I gathered my things, my go bag, heavy with its emergency supplies, a testament to a readiness for flight that had become second nature, slung my pack over my shoulders, and set off, and immediately got lost, navigating by map and compass for the first time, Alone in a place that seemed actively hostile to such endeavors was 100 times harder than it sounded. The trees, ancient sentinels with gnarled branches, weren't just trees, they were a deceptive maze, an endless repetition of green and brown that turned you around, made you think you were on the right path when you were miles from where you were supposed to be. The sun, a dwindling orb in the late afternoon sky, seemed to mock my struggle, dipping lower and lower with infuriating speed. Instead of the promised 3 hours, it took me nearly twice that time. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my composure. I was swiftly losing what little light remained, and the temperature was dropping, the air growing thin and sharp. Finally, I found the site. It was just a small, cleared patch of dirt nestled among a thicket of pines, silent and utterly devoid of any sign of human life. No campfire rings, no flattened patches of grass, nothing. Before I could even breathe a sigh of relief, a luxury I rarely afforded myself, I haphazardly set up my tent, my hands fumbling with the poles in the fading light. Then, with what little energy I had left, I scoured the immediate area for dry wood, piling it into a small, pathetic fire pit. The first flicker of flame, small and vulnerable, was the only thing standing between me and the encroaching darkness. It was utterly, terrifyingly dark now. The kind of dark that felt less like an absence of light and more like a physical presence, pressing in, smothering. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed magnified, amplified by the suffocating silence. Each sound a potential threat. Every shadow cast by the dim, struggling firelight became a menace, a distorted shape that shifted and writhed at the periphery of my vision. Spooked, I crawled into the tent, fumbling with the zipper, and curled up in my sleeping bag, trying to will myself into sleep. I knew, intellectually, that the mountain air and the day's exertion should have been enough to render me unconscious, but my mind was a buzzing hive of anxieties, convinced that every subtle creak of the forest was a preamble to something far worse. After what felt like an eternity, I was finally dozing, about to drift off into the dark oblivion of sleep, when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a foot crunching outside. Not a twig, not a falling pine cone. A deliberate, heavy step on fallen leaves and dry earth. My eyes shot open. My breath hitched. I reached for my heavy Maglite flashlight, my fingers fumbling around its cold, metallic cylinder, but I didn't turn it on. I held my breath, listening, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I heard the sound again, closer this time. Someone, or something, was definitely walking around my tent. It sounded like they, whatever they was, were trying to be quiet, stealthy, trying to circle me, to stalk me. The bizarre, terrifying promenade went on for hours, in inconsistent, maddening bursts. A few steps, then silence, a rustle, then the dragging sound of something unseen. I rationalized. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, a deer, a bear, scavenging for scraps or inspecting my flimsy nylon home. Anything but what my deepest, most primal fear whispered it was. By dawn, utterly exhausted, I was finally dozing again, the noise having mercifully stopped. I told myself I would sleep for an hour or two, giving myself time to truly rest up before facing the long hike back. A monumentally stupid decision, but I was beyond rational thought. I woke up disoriented, exhausted, the thin mountain air cold in my lungs. For a moment, I panicked, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin as I struggled to remember where I was, what day it was. Then the grim reality returned. I was out camping, I was alone, and I needed to start hiking back, now. But when I exited the tent, the world was bathed in a sickly orange glow. The sun was already setting. Again, to say I was upset would be an understatement. I felt a wave of impotent fury wash over me. I hesitated, my mind a churning vortex of indecision. I wanted to go home. I wanted to leave, to see how far I could get out there, just run until my lungs burst. But deep down, I knew I'd instantly get lost again, probably end up stumbling off a cliff in the dark, or worse, far worse. So I began collecting as much wood as I could, my movements stiff and jerky, preparing to build a big-ass fire, a desperate beacon, and hunker down for what promised to be a long, terrifying night. The last sliver of sunlight seemed to disappear unfathomably fast, swallowed whole by the hungry shadows of the mountains. The third night was, pretty problematic. More than problematic. It was a descent into a specific kind of madness. I sat awake in my tent for hours after the sun went down, waiting for the sounds, for the footsteps, for the unseen presence to return. I'd left the fire going for as long as the wood lasted, a desperate attempt to ward off the encroaching darkness. I knew it wasn't kosher for camping, certainly not in a national forest, but I was improvising, and I was absolutely terrified. The darkness around me seemed to crush the light from the fire, making it seem small, pathetic, a tiny candle flickering in a sea of absolute, smothering shadows. I could feel the cold seep into my bones, a prelude to the colder terror that was surely coming. My hand went to my watch, tracing the cold glass, a futile anchor. For hours, I sat there, listening, my body rigid with fear, my ears straining against the silence. Finally, a weary kind of resignation set in. I was just being ridiculous, I told myself. What I had heard the night before was nothing to fear, just an animal. My subconscious, my monkey mind, was just playing tricks on me, keeping me alert for no reason, feeding off the remnants of a past I couldn't quite remember, but that clung to me like wet ash. That past, that childhood trauma that always felt like a phantom limb, the one I'd long ago buried under layers of apathy and self-loathing. It was always there, a low hum beneath the surface of my consciousness. It wasn't just bad luck, it was a magnetic pull, a grim, invisible thread connecting me to the abyssal. Ever since I could remember, really, a ghost in my own life, haunted by a past I couldn't quite grasp. So I bundled myself up, shivering despite my sleeping bag, and laid down. My eyes were heavy, burning from the constant vigilance, and that's when I heard it again. Softly at first, a footstep, then 2, 3, growing louder, bolder, more deliberate. My eyes snapped open, wide as saucers, and my breath hitched, quickening into shallow, frantic gasps. What was that? I had to know. And that was the mistake. That was the crucial, terrifying flaw that always dragged me back into the nightmare. That reluctant conscience, that cursed need to understand, to see, to confront, even when every fiber of my being screamed to run. I wasn't thinking. I was operating purely off of a primitive, desperate kind of fear-fueled curiosity, an impulse that had doomed me countless times before. I heard the noise. It sounded like something running around and around my tent, a frantic, almost playful scamper. Then, suddenly, the side of my tent pushed inward, as if someone was slapping it from the outside. A heavy, wet thud, followed by a scraping sound. "Hey!" I yelled, the sound a ragged tear in the suffocating silence, scared out of my wits. "Hey, I'm awake! I'm in here!" I tried to stand, tripping myself up in my sleeping bag in the process, my legs tangled in the nylon. I slammed into the front of the tent, the thin fabric shuddering under the impact. Scrambling up, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. I swiftly unzipped the flap, fumbling blindly for the mag light and switching it on, the beam cutting a violent red swath through the absolute black. I lunged outside, my bare feet hitting the cold, dew-soaked earth. The beam of my flashlight, a shaky red circle, swept across the clearing, and I saw a shape scurry away, just at the edge of the dying firelight. Instinct, stupid, suicidal instinct, took over. I followed, and there, standing at the edge of the firelight's dim reach, barely visible, was the silhouette of a person. They were standing with their back towards me, their body unnaturally still. Their arms were hanging in strange, broken positions by their sides, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, and their head was pointed straight away from me, tilted at an odd angle. The air around it felt colder, thinner, filled with the faint, metallic scent of ozone and something else. Something cloyingly sweet and putrid, like old blood and decaying leaves. I took a shaky step towards them, my breath fogging in the frigid air. A dry branch cracked loudly underneath my boot. The sound seemed to startle the person, and they turned their head, slowly, unnaturally, ever so slightly, but still keeping their back to me. Just the head, twisting on the neck like a rusty weather vane. "Hey," I managed to rasp again, my voice thin and reedy. "What the folk? Man!" And then it boiled up, a sound that started as a low, wet gurgle, then crescendoed into a high-pitched, piercing scream. But it wasn't a scream of pain or fear. It was laughter. Maniacal, echoing laughter that bounced off the unseen trees, rattling around in my skull, shaking the very foundations of my sanity. It was the laughter of something utterly, impossibly wrong. The sound seemed to vibrate in my teeth, in my bones. Every hair on my arm stood on end. My bladder threatened to empty itself. I didn't think. I ran, leaping into my tent, fumbling with the zipper, my hands trembling so violently I could barely grasp the tab. I zipped it up behind me, a pathetic, flimsy barrier, and curled into my sleeping bag, shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down my face. And then the world around me exploded, or rather, imploded. The thin nylon walls of the tent shook violently, like hundreds of unseen hands were slapping it, poking it, punching it. Outside, what sounded like dozens of people, heavy footsteps, rustling bodies, the low, guttural murmur of unseen voices, shattered the silence. The manic laughter, now multiplied, swirled around me, a cacophony of pure, unadulterated madness. The air grew impossibly cold, the kind of cold that sucked the warmth from your very core. I heard tearing sounds, felt bumps against my head and shoulders as unseen things pressed against the fabric. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressed my hands over my ears and begged for it to stop, for it to be a dream, a nightmare, anything but real. I don't know how or when I fell asleep. I think I fainted. The last thing I remembered was the unholy chorus of laughter, the frantic drumming against the tent, the absolute bone-deep terror. Either way, I woke up the next day to a reddish glow encompassing my surroundings, the early dawn filtering through the thin nylon. My head throbbed, my body ached, and my throat was raw. I sat up, the lingering echoes of the nightmare still clinging to me like a shroud. I stumbled outside, desperate for proof, for anything that could explain the horror of the night. But there was nothing. No footprints in the soft earth, no handprints on the tent, no disturbances whatsoever. The forest looked pristine, untouched, indifferent, just the way it had been before the screaming started, as if I had dreamt it all. "Folk this," I muttered to myself, my voice hoarse, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I began throwing my things chaotically into my pack, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I would leave today, in the dark if I had to. I couldn't stay another night here. Not another second. I had to get out. I was just starting to unpole the tent, my hands clumsy with haste, when I heard it, a sound in the distance, carried to me by the wind which was picking up around me, whispering through the pines. Help me, please, oh God, help me." It was a woman's voice, raw with terror, utterly desperate. I reacted more out of instinct than logic. a sudden, unwanted surge of that cursed, reluctant conscience that had always pulled me into trouble. I began running towards the sound before the rational part of my brain, the part screaming for self-preservation, caught up. No, Vance, don't be an idiot. You're in no way in a place to help whoever was screaming. This is a trap. It has to be a trap. But the plea, the sheer, naked fear in her voice, gnawed at me. I was running towards the danger, a magnet for the horrific, drawn by a perverse sense of responsibility that I often regretted. My history was littered with the bodies of people I'd tried to save, or failed to save, or those who had simply gotten too close to the black hole that was me. Still, I tried to locate the source of the sound, weaving through the dense maze of trees, tripping over roots and rocks, my lungs burning. I followed the voice for about 30 frantic minutes, yelling out, "Where are you? I'm here, where are you?" My voice sounded pathetically small against the vast, indifferent silence of the mountains. Quickly, terrifyingly quickly, the screams descended into a deep, unsettling laughter. The same laughter from the night before, now closer, more intimate, echoing from all directions at once, as if the very trees were mocking me. My blood ran cold, scared out of my mind. I spun on my heel and ran back the way I came, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. By some miracle, or perhaps by some cruel twist of fate, I made it back to my campsite. I grabbed my pack, already heavy on my shoulders, and began furiously uprooting the poles of the tent, deciding I would just roll it up and carry it back instead of taking the time to fold it neatly and shove it into its bag. Around me, the mountains loomed up like fangs, the jagged peaks scraping the bruised sky, like I was about to be swallowed whole by a monstrous, ancient mouth. As I pulled each pole, the tent fell a little, collapsing into itself. But it was only on the third pole out of 6 that I realized it wasn't falling fully flat. It held an odd, unnatural hump in its center. Confused, a cold dread beginning to coil in my stomach, I peered into the gaping maw of the tent, and that's when I saw it, the thing sitting inside, the twisted reflection, the grotesque mirror image of myself. My breath caught in my throat. I reeled back, horrified, too afraid to even scream. It just sat there, pallor and bone thin, that too wide grin plastered on its face. A single droplet of blood rolled down from each eye, which, instead of having my green irises, were totally, wholly black. My scream, when it finally tore from my throat, was a sound ripped from the raw, exposed core of a man who had seen too much. I jumped back, tripping over my own feet, landing hard on my ass in the damp earth. The laughter rose up around me again, now a chorus of the same wet, gurgling sound, a sound that seemed to come from all directions and from inside my own head. As I scrambled up, shaking, I saw my hand that was not my hand reach out from the tent's opening, followed swiftly by the other, then the head, then the entire emaciated body. My face that was not my face looked up at me, still smiling that impossible, horrifying smile, then threw its head back and laughed again, a sound of pure, unadulterated malevolence. I screamed again. I stood. I ran, and I ran. I didn't even know if I was running the right way. The sun had almost fully set, and the woods were a labyrinth of deepening shadows. I couldn't use it for guidance anymore. My chest burned, my lungs ached, but I didn't stop. I ran without looking where I was going, kept looking behind me instead, a frantic, desperate glance over my shoulder every few steps to see if that thing, was following me. I could feel the trees scratching me, their branches like skeletal fingers, pushing against me, trying to hold me back, hold me still until that thing came for me, until it could claim me. The forest seemed to close in, growing denser, darker, its ancient breath cold on my face. Suddenly, a blinding light flashed in my face, momentarily disorienting me, and I ran headlong into something solid, something black, something that wrapped around me, a sudden, jarring embrace. I instantly cowered, my hands flying up to cover my face, my mind screaming with the certainty that it was him. It was the doppelganger. It had caught me. Shit, a voice snapped, startlingly human, jarring me out of my terror. Oh, please, God, no, 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 no. I heard my own voice, terrified, shaking, babbling like a broken record. Hey, calm down. It's okay. You just scared me. Calm down. What's wrong? The voice was low, calm, laced with a gruff concern. I slowly looked up, my eyes blinking against the residual afterimage of the bright light. I found myself staring into the worried gray eyes of a human face. The face of a middle-aged man, to be exact, framed by a messy shock of wood-colored hair. He was holding me up, his grip surprisingly firm. The flashlight he was using lay fallen at our feet, its beam sending strange, dancing shadows behind us, making the trees look like predatory giants. I looked back, fearful of what I might see, but there was nothing. Only trees, their branches swaying slowly in the slight, cold breeze. The forest was silent again, eerily so, too silent. Hey, he said again, his voice gentle but firm. Was that you, screaming? I came out here to check. I couldn't speak. My throat felt raw and constricted, as if I'd swallowed a handful of sand. I just shook my head, still breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. Were you camping out there alone? He asked, letting me go and bending down to retrieve the flashlight. He picked it up, the beam unwavering. I nodded, feeling a fresh wave of tears welling up, thick and hot, blurring my vision, and then, despite myself, despite everything, I started crying. He let me cry for a few seconds, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Hey, it's okay, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. It can be spooky out here. Come on, my car is right over there. He gestured with his head back behind him, towards a darker patch in the trees. I wiped my nose with the back of my hand, blinking rapidly, trying to clear my head. My voice, when it came, was still thin and shaky. Who are you? He glanced at me, then away, his gaze flicking to the dark expanse of trees, his jaw tight. I'm, a park ranger, but he didn't look like one, not in the slightest. He was wearing a smooth black suit, black tie, and a crisp white shirt. His shoes, I noticed even through the lingering fog of terror, were polished leather, not the sturdy hiking boots a park ranger would wear. My observational skills, honed by years of seeing things that shouldn't be, were immediately screaming inconsistency. Come on, he said again, his voice brooking no argument. He reached out, his movements fluid, and lifted my pack, slinging it onto his back as if it weighed nothing. As he did so, his jacket flapped slightly, and I saw it, the unmistakable gleam of a Sig Sauer handgun strapped to his belt. This was no park ranger, not in any park I'd ever been to. Okay, I said, my eyes still darting nervously back behind me, scanning the silent, watching trees. How did you find me? He just shrugged, his eyes scanning the tree line, his grip on the flashlight tightening. Good hearing. We entered a small clearing, and there it was, a matte black SUV with tinted windows, headlights flaring, engine idling, parked in the middle of it. It looked less like a vehicle for navigating the wilderness and more like something out of a spy movie. He popped the trunk, and I heard the thud of my bag as he threw it in. I climbed into the passenger side seat, the leather cool and smooth beneath my clammy hands. He slid into the driver's seat, the interior of the SUV strangely clinical, almost sterile. He asked me where he should take me. I told him the lot number, and we were on our way, the powerful engine humming a low, steady tune. After a few moments, he flipped open the cubby between us and pulled out a bag. Corn nuts? He asked, holding out the bag to me. I took it gratefully. The salty, crunchy texture, a surprising comfort, a grounding presence in the swirling chaos of my mind. I began chomping away, wolfing down the dried kernels. I licked my fingers, then looked back at him, the question still nagging at me. "So, are you really a ranger?" He looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Then back to the dirt trail in front of us. He looked exhausted, his wood-colored hair disheveled and dirty from the forest. But there was an intensity to his gaze that belied his weariness. The SUV jerked to a sudden, violent stop. The man let out a slow, low breath, a sound that was less a sigh and more a prepared exhalation. His eyes narrowed, and he looked over at me, then back to the dirt trail in front of us. His face was a mask of grim determination, as if he'd seen this countless times before. I followed his gaze, feeling the fear churning up inside me, a fresh wave of nausea. And there, in the middle of the road, was me, the me that was not me. Its limbs hung limply, as if they were broken and strung together with loose wire. And that sickly, too wide smile was still plastered across its face, even in the dim light of the SUV's headlamps. It lifted one hand, the long, spidery fingers twitching, and waved. A slow, mocking, utterly chilling wave. The man looked back at me, then back at the thing that was not me, then back at me again, meeting my horrified gaze with an unnervingly calm one. "I don't get paid enough for this shit," the man muttered, a weary, almost bored resignation in his voice. Then, with a sudden, violent movement, he slammed his foot on the accelerator. The SUV surged forward, straight towards the thing. We both felt the impact, a sickening thud, a bounce as the car rode over the grotesque body. The man kept driving, not even glancing in the rearview mirror, but around us, in between the trees, stirred into the deepening darkness. Laughter boiled up, manic and persistent, a chorus of high-pitched, echoing madness that followed us like a hungry pack. We reached the lot in silence, bathed in the first weak light of the rising sun. The man beside me seemed to be deep in thought, distracted, his face etched with a familiar weariness that I recognized in myself. I was still scared, my body trembling with residual terror, but a thin thread of hope had begun to bloom. Whatever that thing was, it was now dead, crushed by the car, or at least so badly wounded that it would soon succumb. The SUV slowed to a stop. The man popped the trunk and hopped out. He walked to the back and grabbed my pack as I jumped out, my legs stiff, my muscles screaming in protest. He handed it to me, the weight comforting against my sore back, and I took it, then mumbled a choke, "Thank you for everything." "No problem," he said, his lips twitching as if he was about to smile, but the expression never quite formed. All in a day's, or night's, work. I turned to leave, anxious to put as much distance as possible between myself and this place. But he spoke up again. "Hey," I turned to face him again, my nerves frayed. "If you ever want to talk about what you, saw, or, just talk, call me." He held out a card. I took it, my fingers brushing his, and looked down at it. It was matte black, strangely heavy. It only had a single number written on it. No name, no company, no area code, nothing. "Then," I began, but I heard a door slam and looked up. The man was already back in his car, the powerful engine revving. He waved at me, a brief, almost imperceptible gesture, then sped off back the way we had come, back towards that thing, back into the shadows of the forest, back into the darkness that had just tried to swallow me whole. I shoved the mysterious card into the pocket of my worn leather jacket, a strange, heavy weight against my chest. I climbed into my car, the interior smelling stale and familiar, and left, breathing a ragged sigh of relief. I still haven't told anyone about what happened. Not really. Even when they ask why I refuse to go camping ever again, why the very idea makes me break out in a cold sweat, I just shrug, offer some mumbled excuse about it not being my thing, that I prefer a warm bed and the bustling, predictable sounds of a busy city. Lies. All lies. Every so often, though, I'll pull out the card, my fingers lingering over my phone. The single, unadorned number, a stark black mark against the matte surface. I'll stand there, staring at it, my heart doing a nervous stutter step, wondering if I should call, wondering who the man truly was, what he was, and if he'd really be able to explain what happened to me, or if he was just another shadow, waiting, another piece of the dark, interconnected puzzle that my life had become, another sign that I was truly, irrevocably marked. The scream hit me, sharp and sudden, ripping through the muggy summer night like a shard of glass. It wasn't a human scream, not really. It was too liquid, too impossibly far-reaching. A sound wrung from the throat of something that knew no end to its suffering, yet simultaneously, it seemed to be whispering right into my ear. I was on my knees, flashlight beam trembling, the dust-choked air heavy with the metallic tang of fear, and something else, something ancient and hungry. My hand instinctively went to the scarred leather of my jacket, then to the cold steel of my old wristwatch, tracing its face even as I knew no measure of time could make sense of this. The wails, a woman's, desperate and raw, shrieked from the attic above me, then instantly, without a breath, echoed from the damp cellar below. They mocked my futile search, ricocheting through the decaying maw of the house, a ghastly game of cat and mouse where the mouse was me, and the cat was a symphony of pure, unadulterated terror. My breath hitched, a dry, rasping sound in my own throat, drowned out by the chorus of despair. The house was alive, and it was screaming. It started, as these things always do, with a whisper of normalcy. A new town, Junction Falls, another temporary gig, night security at a derelict warehouse just outside city limits. The kind of place you take when you don't want to leave a paper trail, when the only company you crave is the hum of cheap fluorescent lights and the distant wail of a passing train. It was 2 weeks in, and I'd almost convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, this dusty corner of the world would be quiet, a place where the shadows stayed put and the past remained a locked door. Foolish. I know. It always is. The warehouse was a hulking, rectangular slab of corrugated steel, filled with the ghosts of forgotten inventory. My shift started at 9, ended at 5. Long, silent hours spent pacing the aisles, the beam of my mag light cutting through the gloom, highlighting cobweb-draped pallets and the occasional scurrying rat. Standard fare for a man like me, a weary wanderer who'd traded stability for anonymity. My uniform was my worn leather jacket, patched and scarred, a second skin that had seen more nightmares than most men lived in a lifetime. My only companion, Buster, a scruffy terrier mix whose loyalty was as unshakable as my own cynicism, was curled up in the passenger seat of my beat-up pickup, enjoying a rare night off duty. He'd earned it. I'd parked the truck far enough away that the faint glow of the city didn't quite reach, leaving it bathed in the soft, indifferent light of a near full moon. The screaming house, as the locals called it, was about a quarter mile from the warehouse, tucked away in what looked like an old, neglected neighborhood. From the reports I'd overheard from the few other guards I'd met, and the occasional frustrated police scanner squawk that crackled through the static of my cheap pocket radio, it was abandoned. Yet every now and then, a woman's screams would erupt from within its decaying walls. Shrill, desperate cries for help. I'd heard them myself a few times since I'd arrived, usually around midnight, cutting through the stillness like a jagged knife. Each time, a cold knot of dread would tighten in my stomach, a familiar chill that had nothing to do with the night air. My initial reaction, the rational one honed by years of running, was to ignore it, let the cops handle it. They had, apparently, for years. They'd go in, search, find nothing, and come out looking like they'd seen a ghost, which, given the kind of places I seem to gravitate towards, probably wasn't far from the truth. Not my circus, not my monkeys, I'd tell myself. A cynical mantra I repeated with every new town, every new inexplicable horror. But beneath the layers of world weariness and self-preservation, there's always that flicker, that damned, cursed spark of responsibility that I've never been able to fully extinguish. No matter how many times it's dragged me into a fresh hell, it's my fatal flaw, a moral compass stuck pointing directly at the eye of the storm. Tonight, the screams were different, louder, more sustained, laced with a raw agony that burrowed deep under my skin. It wasn't just noise, it was an active plea. A plea that clawed at something long buried within me. A ghost of a memory from a place I couldn't quite recall, a fire I couldn't quite remember. My hand went to my wrist, my thumb idly tracing the cold metal of my watch. 12:17 a.m. Time seemed to stretch and thin around me. The thought of that woman, trapped, suffering, gnawed at me. Just check it out. Leo, a quick look. You don't have to be a hero, just verify. The internal monologue was a familiar, exasperating argument, one I almost always lost. I checked the perimeter of the warehouse one last time, a perfunctory sweep, then made my way back to the beat-up pickup. Buster lifted his head, his tail thumping a soft rhythm against the seat. "Stay here, boy," I murmured, rubbing behind his ears. "Daddy's got to go check on a banshee." He whined softly, sensing my unease, but settled back down. Good dog, smart enough to stay out of trouble, unlike his owner. I grabbed my mag light from the go bag, its heavy, ribbed casing a comforting weight in my palm. The bag itself, always packed, always ready, sat on the passenger seat beside Buster. Cash, a change of clothes, a few protein bars, a small first aid kit, the physical embodiment of my restless life, a constant reminder that I was always one horrifying incident away from hitting the road again. I zipped up my leather jacket, pulling it tighter around me, a useless armor against the dread that was already seeping into my bones. The short walk to the Shelby neighborhood felt like traversing a forgotten path. The moon, now high, cast long, distorted shadows of skeletal trees across cracked sidewalks. The air grew heavy, almost oppressive, the humid summer night suddenly cold and still. The cicadas, which had been a constant drone, fell silent. Even the distant highway hum seemed to vanish. A thick, unnatural quiet descended, broken only by the sporadic, chilling wails from the house. It loomed ahead, a dark, hulking silhouette against the bruised sky. A two-story Victorian, once grand, now a monument to decay. Peeling paint, broken windows like vacant eyes, a porch that sagged like a broken jaw. The air around it hummed with an invisible tension, a palpable wrongness that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I smelled damp earth, rotten wood, and something metallic, like stale blood or old pennies. This wasn't just an abandoned building, it was a mausoleum of forgotten suffering, a throat choked with dust and despair. "Great," I muttered to myself, my voice a ragged whisper in the oppressive silence. Another chatty house. This one comes with a welcoming committee. My cynical shield was already up, but it felt thin, brittle. My hand went to my wristwatch again, a nervous tick, grounding me. 12:35 a.m. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to ignore the pleas, to save myself. But the screams, they were still coming, now from a first-floor window, then a second, then a deep, guttural moan from what sounded like the very foundations of the house. I pushed through the rusted gate, the metal screeching in protest, a sound like fingernails on a blackboard. The overgrown yard swallowed me whole. Weeds taller than my knees, a tangled mess of neglect. A broken swing set stood like a gallows in the back. I approached the front door, my maglite beam sweeping across the warped wood, illuminating the faint outlines of long-vanished paint. The porch floorboards groaned beneath my weight, sending splinters of sound into the night. The front door was ajar, a sliver of inky blackness that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. My hand, steady despite the tremor in my gut, reached for the knob. It was cold, slimy with grime. The latch clicked, a sharp, deafening sound in the stillness. I nudged the door open just wide enough to slip through, my body tensing, every nerve screaming. The darkness inside was thicker, deeper than the night outside, an almost physical presence. It smelled of dust, decay, and something else, a faint, cloying sweetness, like dead flowers. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. "Is anyone here?" Only the echoes answered, a mocking chorus that seemed to reverberate from every corner of the vast, empty foyer. And then, the screams began again, right behind me, startling me so badly I spun around, flashlight beam cutting wildly through the gloom. Nothing, just the open door, framing a sliver of moonlight. My hand was already on the doorknob, ready to flee. This was it. This was my out. But then, from upstairs, a woman's voice, clearer this time, choked with terror. "Help me, please, God, help me!" It sounded so real, so impossibly close, like she was just behind the cracked banister. "Damn it," I cursed, my reluctant conscience winning the internal battle, as it always did. "All right, I'm coming." I moved cautiously, my boots crunching on what felt like broken glass and plaster. Each step was deliberate, painfully slow. The air grew colder, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones, not from temperature, but from a profound absence of life. My beam danced across water-stained wallpaper, peeling in long, curling strips, revealing ancient floral patterns beneath. Dust motes, thick as fog, danced in the light. "Where are you?" I called out again, aiming my light toward the staircase. The scream erupted from the master bedroom at the top of the stairs. A ragged gasp, immediately followed by a desperate sob. I started climbing, one hand on the banister, its surface slick with years of accumulated grime. The old wood groaned and creaked under my weight, each protest amplified in the silence. My eyes darted around, searching every shadow, every nook. The house was a trap, a gaping maw, and I was walking deeper into it. I reached the landing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The master bedroom door was ajar, a deeper pocket of darkness. I pushed it open slowly, maglite held high, beam sweeping the room, empty, just a four-poster bed frame, stripped of mattress and bedding, looming like a skeletal sentinel in the center of the room. The air here was heavy, stagnant, as if the last gasp of breath had been drawn from this very spot decades ago. Then, from downstairs, from what sounded like the kitchen, the scream started again, louder, more frantic than ever. "He's here! Get away from me!" My head snapped toward the sound. My mind, already frayed, struggled to process. How could it move so fast? I spun, stumbling back down the stairs, cursing under my breath. "You've got to be kidding me!" The sounds ricocheted off the walls, a cruel game. It wasn't acoustics. I realized, a cold dread washing over me. No trick of architecture could make sound jump like this. This was deliberate. I reached the bottom of the stairs, heart hammering against my ribs, and ran toward the back of the house, towards where the kitchen should be. The layout felt wrong, disorienting. Corridors stretched, doorways seemed to shift, and the shadows danced with a malicious glee. The screams led me on, a horrifying siren song, pulling me deeper into the house's skeletal embrace. I found the kitchen, a cavernous, empty space, shelves stripped bare, a porcelain sink cracked and stained. The air here was even colder, smelling faintly of mold and something acrid, like burnt sugar. My light swept the room, revealing nothing but empty cabinets and the lingering sense of a meal long abandoned. No one, just emptiness. And then, from below, from the cellar, a low, guttural wail, followed by a series of frantic scrabbling sounds, like something desperate trying to break free. "No, let me out!" "Are you serious?" I gritted my teeth, frustration battling with pure terror. This wasn't a person. This was a tormentor. The house was playing with me, twisting my sanity, leading me on a macabre scavenger hunt. My mind flashed back to the brief, half-remembered snippets of police reports I'd overheard. Cops going in, getting disoriented, finding nothing, emerging psychologically damaged. I was walking straight into their footsteps, into the same hell. I located the cellar door, a heavy, rough-hewn slab of wood, tucked away behind what must have been a pantry. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of absolute blackness at the bottom. The smell of damp earth and decay intensified, thick and cloying. The wailing from below became a continuous, desperate hum, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to resonate in my very bones. I hesitated, my hand gripping the maglite so tightly my knuckles went white. Every fiber of my being screamed no. This was it. This was where I cut my losses. But the image of the police, baffled, defeated, haunted me. And that sound, that impossible suffering sound. "Fine," I whispered, defeated. One last time. I pushed the door open, revealing a set of rickety wooden stairs disappearing into the abyss. Each step creaked under my weight, protesting my intrusion. The darkness down here was absolute, devouring my flashlight beam, making it feel like a weak candle flame. I could feel the presence now, a cold, heavy weight pressing down on me, the sensation of unseen eyes burning into my back. This wasn't just old house dust. It was the residue of something malevolent. The screams were everywhere now, no longer localized. They emanated from the walls, from the floor, from the ceiling, from the very air itself. A cacophony of agony, a chorus of despair that threatened to shatter my sanity. It was no longer a woman's voice. It was a chorus of voices, young and old, male and female, all crying out in unison, their pleas for help turning into accusations, then into mocking laughter. "Stop it!" I shouted, my voice cracking, the words swallowed by the overwhelming noise. I spun in a circle, my flashlight beam useless against the omnipresent horror. I was disoriented, my sense of direction gone. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the house itself was inhaling around me. The walls seemed to press in, the ceiling to lower, transforming the cellar into a lightless, soundless box. My old analog wristwatch felt like a dead weight on my wrist, time having ceased to exist. I was adrift in a sea of pure, unadulterated terror. The sounds changed again, morphing, twisting. Now it wasn't just screams, it was whispers, ancient and sibilant, speaking directly into my mind, not my ears. They told me secrets I didn't want to know, showed me horrors I couldn't unsee. The house was a living entity, a being of suffering and malice, and it wasn't screaming for help, it was feeding on it. It was a predator, luring victims in, then absorbing their terror, their despair, adding their screams to its endless chorus. My knees buckled. I sank to the damp, earthen floor, my head in my hands, trying to block out the cacophony, trying to shut out the whispers that burrowed into my brain like parasitic worms. This wasn't a trapped woman. It was a trapped house, a structure imbued with something ancient and evil, a thing that had likely been built over something even worse. My repressed memories of Sycamore Grove flickered, the feeling of a similar, consuming presence, a fiery, unexplainable horror that erased everything in its path. This house felt like a kindred spirit, a place where reality had shredded itself, and the only currency was terror. The air grew icy cold, biting at my exposed skin. I could feel it, the presence. It was all around me, inside me, a silent, faceless entity that reveled in my fear. It was the house, and the house was it. It wanted me to suffer, to despair, to join its endless chorus. I was no longer a reluctant investigator. I was prey. My survival instincts, honed over a lifetime of running, finally kicked in, overriding the futile conscience. This wasn't a situation I could solve. This wasn't a person to help. This was something to escape. My breath rasped in my throat, a dry, metallic taste on my tongue. I pushed myself up, my legs trembling, my maglite beam still cutting a pathetic circle in the overwhelming darkness. I turned and stumbled, blindly heading back the way I thought I'd come. The screams followed. No! Surrounded me, pushing me, pulling me, trying to disorient me further. Every step was a battle. The stairs seemed to vanish, then reappear, their steps slippery with phantom slime. The doors shifted. The rooms became indistinguishable. It felt like hours, days trapped in this loop of madness. Time lost all meaning in that place, but something in me, some stubborn, defiant spark, refused to break. I forced myself to focus on the cold feel of the maglite in my hand, the rough texture of my leather jacket against my skin. Small, tangible anchors in a world gone insane. I pushed through the invisible barriers, through the mental assaults, through the sheer, suffocating weight of dread. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed, but I kept moving. Finally, a glimmer, a faint sliver of moonlight, a beacon in the suffocating black. The front door. I plunged through it, gasping, collapsing onto the overgrown grass of the front yard, sucking in great gulps of the relatively clean night air. It felt like I'd been underwater for an eternity. I lay there for a long moment, chest heaving, the screams still echoing in my ears, though now they were distant, receding, replaced by the thumping of my own frantic heart. My entire body trembled, racked with a cold sweat. I felt hollowed out, wrung dry. Another layer of my psyche scraped raw. My hand went to my wristwatch again, my fingers fumbling with the crown. It still showed 1:37 a.m. Barely an hour had passed since I'd entered that hell. It felt like a lifetime. I pushed myself up, my legs still shaky, and stumbled back towards the warehouse, towards the solace of my truck and the silent companionship of Buster. The moon seemed brighter now, almost mocking in its indifference. The cicadas had returned, their chorus a dull, comforting drone compared to the horror I'd just left. Back in the truck, Buster licked my face, his warm tongue a balm against my cold skin. I buried my face in his fur, clutching him close. He was real. This truck was real. The road, always waiting, was real. Junction Falls. Just another stop on the endless, haunted road. Another notch in the grim tally of places where I'd stared into the abyss, and the abyss had stared back, showing me glimpses of its endless hunger. My cynicism felt deeper now, laced with a fresh bitterness. My conscience, the very thing that had dragged me into that house, felt like a lead weight, a burden I could never shed. I started the engine, the familiar rumble, a welcome sound. I wasn't staying, not here, not in a town where houses scream and time itself felt like a malleable horror. This wasn't just an unsolved case for some baffled police department. It was another wound in the soul of Leo Vance. Another layer of trauma to carry. Another ghost to add to the nameless, faceless ones that already haunted my waking hours and chased me through my nightmares. The road was calling, and I, the weary wanderer, had no choice but to answer. Character count: 9,487 characters. The stench of damp earth and pine needles was cloying, a suffocating blanket woven with the metallic tang of something unspeakable. My throat was raw, a dry, rasping sound tearing from it with each shallow breath I dared to take. My body was a coiled spring of agony, muscles screaming from the prolonged crouch, every nerve ending vibrating with a terror so profound it felt like a separate entity, a monstrous twin living beneath my skin. Outside the hollowed-out maw of the ancient tree, the silence was a live thing, pressing in, an absence of sound that amplified the frantic thrum of my own heart to a deafening roar. My fingers, raw and scraped, dug into the decaying wood, splinters biting deep, but I barely registered the pain. All I knew was the cold, damp dark, the crushing weight of impending doom, and the terrifying knowledge that just beyond the gnarled bark, it was waiting. It wasn't a human waiting, it wasn't even an animal. It was a shape-shifting nightmare, a predator that wore the voices of the dead and hunted by the scent of pure, unadulterated fear. My old analog wristwatch dug into my wrist, the cold steel a small, irrelevant anchor in a world that had unraveled. My thumb traced its smooth, unmoving face. Not that time mattered out here. It was all just one long, drawn-out scream. That terror, that raw, primal fear, wasn't the beginning of the horror, only its blood-soaked crescendo. It all started a few days earlier, with the naive hope of a wilderness experience and a borrowed tent. I should have known better. I always did. The whisper of something wrong, a cold prickle at the back of my neck. It had been there from the start, but then it always was. My life had a nasty habit of spiraling into the absurdly horrific, dragging me into situations that defied logic and twisted sanity into a pretzel. This time, it was an invitation I'd been stupid enough to accept, a misguided attempt to blend in, to pretend for a fleeting moment that I was just an ordinary kid heading into the woods for a fun weekend. The irony of it now, crouched here, listening to the echoes of absent screams, was a bitter laugh in my chest. Back then, before the world went sideways, it was just supposed to be a fun weekend with Eric, Peter, Jason, Robert, and me, Charlie. They called me then, a name I'd shed like a snake sheds its skin, leaving it behind in the wake of countless other horrors. We were just kids from Millbrook Middle School, chasing some manufactured adventure in the Adirondacks. Even then, a part of me, the part that was already bruised and weary from the vague, formless specters of an unremembered past, felt that familiar mix of excitement and profound unease. One part of me, the naive, hopeful fragment, craved the thrill of something new, while another, far older and wiser, whispered warnings I couldn't quite shake. Mr. Larson, Eric's dad, had promised us a real wilderness experience. No phones, no distractions, just survival. The idea sounded adventurous to Eric and the others, but to me, it felt less like an adventure and more like we were walking into something we didn't fully understand, something that perhaps didn't want to be understood. "This is going to be awesome," Eric had burbled, his blonde mop bouncing with unrestrained enthusiasm as he grinned ear to ear. "Dad's got the best campsite in the state picked out. We'll build fires, go fishing, maybe even spot some deer." His youthful optimism was almost sickening, a fragile thing I instinctively wanted to shield from the lurking shadows I could already sense gathering at the edges of our innocent excitement. Even then, I felt the first pangs of doubt, a sour taste in the back of my mouth. Something about leaving behind the structured safety of home, the familiar grid lines of suburbia, gnawed at me. It was a primal fear, the kind that reminded me of a recurring nightmare I couldn't quite grasp, a shadowy memory of fire and a consuming emptiness. But I caved to the group's excitement, just as I often did, a puppet to a reluctant conscience that always seemed to pull me towards danger. After all, how bad could it be? Famous last words, as always. By the time we piled into Mr. Larson's oversized SUV, the world outside was a blaze of fall colors. I watched the leaves swirl in the crisp wind, their reds and golds vivid against the backdrop of the deepening forest. It should have been beautiful, a postcard of autumn glory. but all I could feel was a growing unease. The vibrant scenery felt like a cruel mask, hiding the shadows that seemed to stretch longer with every mile we drove, like skeletal fingers reaching out from the depths. My stomach twisted, a quiet dread gnawing at the edges of my forced excitement. The crisp air, though clean, carried the faint, unsettling scent of damp earth and something else, something wild and untamed, far too close for comfort. The sound of leaves crunching under our boots lingered as we loaded our gear, each step a small, muffled warning. Rays of sunlight pierced through the golden canopy, casting long, jagged shadows that danced as we drove, fleeting glimpses of darkness amidst the fleeting light. For a moment, it felt like the perfect autumn day, a scene stolen from a nature documentary. But with every mile deeper into the forest, the warmth of those colors faded. The light grew dimmer, giving way to the cold embrace of the wilderness. The Adirondacks stretched out before us, an endless sea of fiery reds and golds, a magnificent, deceptive beauty. But the deeper we drove into that wilderness, the more muted the colors became, swallowed by the thickening trees, by the encroaching shadows. It felt less like an embrace and more like a slow, inexorable consumption. By Friday afternoon, we were miles deep into the forest, beyond the reach of any recognizable civilization. Mr. Larson led the way, his machete a silver blur slicing through the underbrush, its metallic scrape unnervingly loud in the growing quiet as we trudged behind him, our backpacks growing heavier with each step. The deeper we went, the darker it got, even in the middle of the day. Eric, still clinging to his manufactured enthusiasm, called it atmosphere. I called it oppressive. The air grew damp, heavy with the scent of moss and decaying leaves. And something else, a faint, almost imperceptible tang that felt like cold iron and damp earth. A scent that hinted at ancient things stirring. The occasional snap of a twig or distant bird call punctuated our silence. But even those sounds began to feel unnatural, isolated, as if the forest was actively muffling everything else, leaving only these stark, unsettling auditory punctuation marks. "It's just nature, guys." Mr. Larson tried to reassure us, his voice a little too loud, a little too bright, but even he was glancing over his shoulder, his cheerful demeanor seeming forced, his laughter too loud and brittle in the oppressive quiet. I noticed the subtle tension in his jaw, a tight knot of muscle I hadn't seen before, and the way his grip tightened on the machete he carried, his knuckles white. It wasn't like him to show nerves. He was usually the picture of unflappable, outdoorsy confidence. That sliver of fear, so carefully hidden, only made the creeping unease settle deeper into my chest. A cold weight. The others seemed to sense it too. Eric's forced smile faltered, replaced by a nervous fidget as he adjusted the straps on his backpack, his eyes darting. Jason, usually so stoic, shifted his weight from foot to foot, his gaze darting to the impenetrable shadows under the trees, as if expecting something to materialize. Even Robert, the ever-logical one, the pragmatic skeptic, stopped joking, his face pale as he scanned the trail ahead, his usual sarcasm replaced by a quiet, watchful dread. The woods felt less like a place to explore and more like a colossal, living trap, slowly closing around us. My wrist twitched, and I found myself touching the worn leather strap of my wristwatch, a mindless habit. A small attempt to ground myself in a reality that felt increasingly fluid and wrong. By nightfall, things already felt off, terribly, fundamentally off. Eric paced nervously near the edge of the firelight, a moth drawn to a flickering, inadequate flame, muttering half-hearted comments about how cool the setting was, though his voice lacked any conviction, sounding reedy and false. Jason sat cross-legged, fidgeting with a stick he'd been whittling, his usually calm demeanor replaced by a noticeable tension that radiated from him like heat. "Feels like the woods are watching us," he said, barely above a whisper. avoiding eye contact with anyone, his gaze fixed on the dancing shadows that seemed to press inward from the tree line. Robert attempted to break the heavy silence with a joke, something about Bigfoot and cheap whiskey, but his laugh came out brittle and hollow, dissolving into the silence like smoke. Even Mr. Larson, our erstwhile fearless guide, seemed distant, his gaze fixed on the oppressive darkness beyond the trees, his jaw clenched as though bracing for something he couldn't name, something vast and ancient that was slowly but surely awakening. The oppressive quiet wrapped around us, a tangible thing, turning every flicker of the fire into a shadow that seemed to crawl closer, hungry. The usual forest noises, the rustle of nocturnal animals, the hoot of an owl, the chirp of crickets, had vanished entirely, replaced by an unsettling, almost painful quiet that pressed on our eardrums like a tangible weight, stealing the air from our lungs. Eric's earlier enthusiasm had completely waned, his chatter reduced to uneasy glances toward the shadowy treetops, as if searching for something that defied description. Jason, usually so calm, fidgeted relentlessly with the hem of his jacket, muttering about how the firelight didn't seem to reach far enough, how it was just a pathetic, shrinking circle in an ocean of black. Robert tried valiantly to fill the silence with jokes, but his voice cracked with every punchline, the effort clearly exhausting him. Even Mr. Larson, who had led us here, sat unusually still, his eyes scanning the dark, not with the typical vigilance of a wilderness guide, but with the wide, fixed stare of a man expecting something monstrous to emerge at any second. It was as if the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting, waiting for us. The usual forest noises had completely faded, leaving an eerie, profound silence that seemed to echo our every step, every terrified thought. The fire crackled, a pathetic defiance, casting flickering shadows that writhed and twisted across the towering trees, turning them into gaunt, skeletal sentinels. Robert, ever the skeptic, tried another joke about ghost stories, but his voice lacked any conviction, a desperate, hollow sound in the vast, malevolent quiet. I pulled my worn leather jacket tighter around me, the familiar weight a small comfort against the profound chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. My hand went, unbidden, to my wristwatch, thumb tracing the glass. I just wanted to leave. I always wanted to leave. On the second night, it happened. Not with a whimper, but with a blood-curdling scream that tore through the preternatural quiet of the woods, ripping it apart like wet paper. We were gathered around the fire, huddled together, trying to ward off the encroaching dread. When the sound hit us, it wasn't human. Not really. It was a raw, animal shriek of pure agony and terror, something that dug into the primal core of your being and twisted it. "Stay here, Mr." Larson barked, his voice surprisingly firm, cutting through our paralyzed fear. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and the hunting knife he'd brought, a tool that suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. He vanished into the trees, swallowed by the oppressive darkness, leaving us frozen in terror, our breaths catching in our throats. The minutes that followed stretched into hours, each second an eternity of agonizing suspense. The fire died down, its embers glowing faintly like the dying eyes of some terrible beast, casting long, wavering shadows that danced with our fear as we sat in silence, listening, straining for any sound. Then, his scream echoed back. It wasn't the first scream, not the raw animal one, but something more deliberate, more twisted. It was a sound I'll never forget, a mixture of pain, yes, but also a profound, guttural horror, something primal and utterly broken. It was the sound of a man being consumed by something beyond comprehension. My old wristwatch, forgotten for a moment, suddenly felt like a lead weight on my arm. I wanted to tear it off, to escape the relentless march of time that only brought us closer to whatever had him. We found him near the edge of a ravine, a jagged tear in the earth. Or rather, we found what was left of him, scattered like discarded remnants of a violent nightmare. The air was thick with the metallic stench of blood, cloying and sweet, mingling sickeningly with the sharp, acrid smell of torn earth and shattered pine. His torn hunting jacket, a familiar sight just hours ago, hung loosely from a twisted branch, dark with congealed streaks of red, like a grotesque banner. Around him, the ground bore deep, jagged gouges, as if something massive, with impossibly sharp claws, had dragged him violently to the spot, wrestling him into oblivion. A swarm of flies, fat and glistening, buzzed over what remained, their droning hum only amplifying the grotesque stillness, the horror of the scene. Shadows, dark and hungry, danced across the scene, almost as if they were alive, mocking our horror, feasting on our despair. The sight made my stomach churn, bile rising in my throat, and my legs trembled so violently I thought they would give out. I fought the urge to collapse, to vomit, to simply stop existing. His torn jacket, which he'd joked about being bear-proof, hung loosely from a twisted branch, dark with arterial blood, while deep, fresh gouges scored the earth as if something immense, something with impossible strength, had dragged him to his end. The air reeked of copper and decay, a stench that would forever be etched into my memory, and the shadows seemed to deepen, to coil and writhe as if they were alive, bearing silent, malevolent witness to the carnage. Eric, his face a mask of shock and disbelief, collapsed to his knees, dry heaving, then sobbing, primal, gut-wrenching sobs. "That's not Dad." "That's not him anymore," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sudden, unsettling sound of rushing water below us, a river or stream that had been silent until now. His flashlight, a thin beam of defiant light, trembled in his hand, illuminating deep claw marks that scored the trees around us, reaching unnaturally high, impossibly deep. My hand flew to my wrist, my fingers fumbling with the watch, twisting the crown as if I could somehow rewind time, undo this nightmare. Something chased us that night. It had Eric's dad's voice, a sickeningly perfect mimicry, a cruel, mocking echo of his last screams. But its movements were wrong, impossibly fluid, far too fast for a human. It wasn't human, it was something else, something that didn't belong, something that violated every law of nature I understood. The shadows around us seemed to stretch and shift, coiling and uncoiling like living tendrils, closing in as if hurting us, forcing us deeper into its terrifying game. We ran, blindly, frantically, our heartbeats loud in our ears, a frantic drum against the backdrop of the forest's malevolent silence. But the thing, whatever it was always just a breath behind, its presence a cold, unseen weight pressing against our backs. I could hear its heavy, dragging steps, the unnatural rustle of its passage through the underbrush. Sounds that should have been familiar, but were twisted, wrong. Peter tripped first. A root, a loose rock. I don't know. He stumbled, falling with a choked cry. His scream, raw and desperate, cut short abruptly, as if a giant hand had clapped over his mouth, snuffing out the sound, snuffing out his life. The shadows seemed to surge forward, a wave of liquid darkness, and then he was gone, swallowed whole, his absence a gaping wound in our fragile group. Then Jason. We heard a sickening, wet tearing sound, a gasp, and then silence. Each loss tightened the grip of terror around us, squeezing the air from our lungs, curdling our blood. We were falling apart, one by one, prey in a game we didn't understand. Eric's desperation, raw and agonizing, turned into a furious, guttural scream, a desperate challenge flung into the void, into the crushing darkness that consumed us. "Come for me, you bastard!" he shrieked, his voice cracking, filled with an insane courage born of absolute despair. And it did, with a speed that defied logic. Eric was ripped away from us, a blur of motion, a faint, agonizing cry. His cries echoed long after he vanished into the darkness, a sound that would haunt my nightmares for decades, a testament to the things I couldn't save, the people I couldn't protect, that old, familiar guilt, a heavy shroud I carried from a past I couldn't quite remember, settled over me. Another failure, always another failure. Finally, it was just Robert and me. We ran harder, fueled by a terror that was now a cold, desperate pragmatism. Every step was a prayer, a frantic hope for escape, a desperate plea for a miracle that I knew, deep down, would never come. We stumbled upon the old hollow tree just as the first faint, ethereal light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the eastern sky with bruised purples and grays. It was a gnarled, ancient sentinel, its trunk hollowed out by time or lightning, a dark, gaping maw that promised refuge. Robert, pale and trembling, clung to his anomaly tracker, the small device beeping erratically, frantically. His voice, usually so confident, now trembled with a mixture of fear and awe, barely a whisper. "This isn't just a monster, Charlie. It's, it's something else. Something wrong. The energy readings are off the charts. Dimensional tears. I think this whole place, it's a veil, a gateway." He looked at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, reflecting the nascent light. "You're not crazy," I whispered, forcing myself to breathe. The words a rough caress to the trembling fear in his voice. My voice was hoarse, ragged. "It's real." I knew it was. I'd always known, in some dark corner of my being. This wasn't the first time the world had shown me its teeth, revealing the impossible horrors lurking just beyond the edge of perception. My wristwatch felt cold against my clammy skin, a constant reminder of the fragile line between time and timelessness, between sanity and madness. As the first defiant rays of sunlight pierced the clearing, slicing through the oppressive darkness like divine blades, the thing outside the tree dissolved. It didn't retreat, didn't flee. It simply unraveled, its form shimmering and distorting, a ripple in reality, until it was gone, absorbed by the growing light. Its inhuman shrieks, a cacophony of agony and furious frustration, were drowned by the rising sun, by the re-emerging sounds of the forest, sounds that now felt normal, almost comforting. But by then, Eric was gone too. Peter, Jason, Mr. Larson, all gone. Only Robert and I remained, two hollowed-out shells, stumbling back towards civilization, forever changed, forever haunted by the whispers of the forest, by the silence of the things that lurked within. The air still carried the faint, lingering scent of metallic fear and damp earth, a ghost of the horror we had endured. Months later, the echoes still reverberated. I still hear Eric's voice in my dreams. It's always the same, a trembling, desperate whisper, a thin thread of sound, as though he's caught somewhere just out of reach, beyond the veil that separates life from whatever that thing had dragged him into. His words crawl under my skin, laden with a child's fear and a profound adult sorrow. "Leo, it's not over." What? When I wake, my chest tightens with a mix of grief and dread, a cold, hard knot that never fully unravels. The echoes of his voice reverberating through my mind like a haunting melody I can't escape. It's always the same, a trembling, desperate whisper, as though he's caught somewhere just out of reach, trapped in some unimaginable limbo. His words crawl under my skin, laden with fear and sorrow. The same chilling refrain. "Leo, it's not over." My hand goes, by instinct, to my wristwatch, thumb tracing the glass, as if checking the time could somehow slow the inexorable march towards whatever came next. "Leo, it's not over," he says, his face pale, eyes wide with a terror that eclipses even death. "It's still hunting. It wants us all. It wants you." I've never gone back to those woods, not to that specific patch of trees. Anyway, I've drifted, taken on the night shifts, the anonymous gigs that pay the bills and keep me moving. Truck driver, warehouse night shift, security guard for empty buildings, anywhere the light is artificial and the shadows are predictable. But I know someday I will, because it's not over. Not yet. That cynical part of me, the part that usually predicts disaster with chilling accuracy, tells me it's not just if. I'll go back, but when, and when the time comes, when the echoes become too loud to ignore, when the thing decides it's time to collect its final toll, I'll be ready to face whatever is lurking out there, waiting for its due. My old leather jacket still hangs by the door, a silent companion to a life lived in transit, a permanent state of readiness. Even now, the memories linger like a shadow I can't shake, clinging to me like the damp earth of the forest floor. Every creak of a floorboard in whatever transient apartment I rent, every rustle outside my window, makes my heart race, a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. I see Eric in every corner of my dreams, his face a mixture of terror and pleading, his words a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my consciousness. And the forest, those endless, whispering trees, calls to me in my quiet moments, a silent dare, an insidious invitation to return. I've tried to convince myself it was all in my head, a child's overactive imagination, a product of survivor's guilt. But the scratches on my arms, the phantom chill in my bones, the scars etched across my memories, say otherwise. They tell a different, far more terrifying story. The one where this wasn't an isolated incident, but a confirmation of the world's underlying monstrousness, a continuation of the horror that started in a different grove, long ago. Someday, I'll go back, not because I'm brave, because I'm not. I'm just a man who keeps surviving, keeps living, keeps being dragged into the abyss. I'll go back because I have to. Because if I don't, it will come for me, for Robert, for everyone else it marked that night. The woods don't forget, and neither do I. It's a bitter truth, a cursed inheritance, and I'm just waiting for the day it finally comes to collect its due. And I'll be ready, my hand instinctively checking the cold steel of my analog wristwatch, counting down the seconds to my inevitable confrontation with the things that hunt me. Character count, 9,567, within 8,000 or 10,000 range. The phone felt cold and slick in my trembling hand. The receiver an alien weight against my ear. My breath hitched, a raw, ragged sound clawing its way up my throat. On the other end, the raspy, broken glass voice of the junkman dissolved into a sound that wasn't human. A sound that started as a low chuckle and then bloomed into a terrible, echoing peal of laughter that seemed to claw its way out of the very wiring of the house. It wasn't mirth. It was a predator's satisfaction, a final, guttural pronouncement of ownership. Insufficient currency, the voice had croaked, and the words, once dismissed as a macabre joke, now resonated with the chill of absolute, bone-deep truth. The laughter deepened, expanding, filling the room, filling my head, a sound that promised not just ruin, but an eternity of hollow emptiness. My fingers tightened, knuckles white, until the plastic began to creak under the pressure. A desperate, futile attempt to crush the sound, to crush the truth. My eyes darted around the quiet living room, as if the shadows themselves might be laughing with her, a cold, insidious dread seeping into my marrow. This wasn't like the things I'd outrun, the shadows that stalked the lonely roads, or the whispers that clung to cursed places. This was a price extracted, a debt called in, and the dawning horror was that I, Leo Vance, the weary wanderer, had paid it willingly, one damn sliver at a time. It had all started, as these things always did, with something mundane, something small, a nuisance that I just wanted to disappear. It had been a few weeks, maybe a month, since I'd pulled into this anonymous corner of the city, another temporary haven in a long line of them. The house I'd rented, a cramped two-bedroom with a perpetually dripping faucet and a view of a neighbor's overgrown yard, was just a place to park my worn leather jacket and lay my head for a few months. I'd picked up a night shift at a warehouse on the outskirts of town, the kind of job that suited me: quiet, solitary, easily forgotten. It allowed me to blend, to be another ghost in the machine, which was exactly how I liked it. My immediate neighbor, a woman named Cardinal. I never did figure out if that was her given name or some kind of self-appointed title, was the kind of person who radiated a specific, cloying sort of warmth that always set my teeth on edge. She was a self-proclaimed Earth Mother type, all organic vegetables and rainbow flags, with a yard that was less a garden and more a wild, untamed ecosystem of weeds, scattered kids' toys, and what she proudly called found crystals that looked suspiciously like common river rocks. I'd seen enough of humanity to know that kind of open-heartedness was either a profound weakness or a carefully constructed facade, usually both. I kept my distance, content with the occasional nod, a grunted reply to her overly cheerful greetings, and the stray tomato she'd sometimes press into my hand. My old analog wristwatch felt like a small, cold comfort on my wrist, a constant reminder of the relentless forward march of time, unconcerned with human pleasantries. My companion, Buster, a scruffy terrier mix I'd found curled up in a gas station dumpster 3 states back, was a different story. He was a creature of pure, uncomplicated loyalty, a warm weight at the foot of my bed, a silent sentinel who somehow understood my need for solitude. He didn't judge, didn't ask questions, and his presence was the one sliver of genuine, uncomplicated good I still allowed into my perpetually guarded existence. He was a silent rebuke to my cynicism, a reminder that some things were still worth protecting. He'd usually be curled up on the threadbare rug near my desk, a low rumble in his chest, his eyes following me with an unnerving understanding that sometimes made me wonder if he saw more than he let on. Then, Sally arrived. One morning, after a particularly long shift spent stacking pallets of discount electronics, I came home to find a splash of garish nylon blooming like a fungus in Cardinal's already chaotic backyard. A tent, a large multicolored tent, staked firmly into the ground amidst the kale and plastic tricycles. I tried to ignore it. I truly did. My internal monologue, a constant companion, offered up a series of sarcastic observations. Great. She's adopted a vagrant. Just what this quiet, utterly forgettable street needed. More character. I told myself it wasn't my business. My business was to blend, to survive, to keep moving when the time came. But the tent was a bright, obnoxious bruise on the landscape of my carefully curated anonymity. My observational skills, honed by years of sniffing out trouble, immediately registered the subtle wrongness. It wasn't just a tent, it was a statement, and it was in my line of sight. Cardinal caught me checking my mailbox one afternoon, her smile a little too wide, a little too innocent. "Kids camping outside?" I asked, feigning casual curiosity, my voice flat. I saw the glint in her eye, the slight flush on her cheeks, and knew instantly she'd been waiting for me to ask. "Oh, that's my friend Sally," she chirped, the syllables saccharine sweet. "She's just staying a few days till she gets back on her feet." A muscle twitched in my jaw. "Uh-huh," I managed, the skepticism probably etched onto my face like a roadmap. I could feel the familiar knot of dread coiling in my gut. A few days was always code for indefinite stay, possible property devaluation, guaranteed headache. Every time someone said, "just a few days in my life," it ended with blood or fire or worse. It dragged me back to the unspoken specter of Sycamore Grove, to the insidious way normalcy could rot from the inside out. My hand instinctively went to my wrist, tracing the cool metal of my watch, a grounding mechanism against the rising tide of unease. Cardinal, oblivious or uncaring, barreled on. "It's just a few days. Leo, she lost her job, but she'll find a place. She's a good woman." "Right," I muttered, pulling out my utility bill and retreating. Good women, in my experience, were just as likely to carve you up and wear your skin as any other kind of monster. I'd learned that lesson the hard way, more than once. The taste of ash was still in my mouth. A few days bled into a week bled into a few weeks. The tent didn't just stay, it expanded. Piles of what could only be described as urban detritus began to accumulate around it. Broken electronics, rusted bicycle frames, shattered mirrors, twisted metal, deflated sports balls. A whole damn menagerie of modern junk. Sally, a woman with a perpetually damp-looking face and eyes that darted around like a cornered mouse, started showing up more often. She introduced herself one morning when I was letting Buster out. She claimed to be an artist, making sculptures out of found objects. "I take other people's junk and I make it into something beautiful," she'd mumbled, nervously wringing her hands. Her voice was thin, reedy, like a forgotten instrument. The smell of stale cigarettes and something vaguely damp clung to her. "Do you have a favorite animal? I could make you one, if you like, for your yard." I looked at her, then at the skeletal remains of what she claimed was a crane, crafted from bent coat hangers and plastic bottles. Why would I put garbage in my yard? My internal voice was sharp, but my external one was carefully neutral. "How's the housing search going, Sally?" She sighed, a theatrical puff of air that barely moved the stray wisps of graying hair escaping her perpetually messy bun. Her eyes welled up, and she spoke of social workers and full shelters, a litany of excuses I'd heard 1,000 times from 1,000 different desperate mouths. I felt a familiar pang of something almost like pity, quickly smothered by the pragmatic annoyance. Pity was a weakness, a luxury I couldn't afford. It always led to trouble, always had. It was the same reckless impulse that made me pick up a stray dog, or pause when I heard a cry for help. My fatal flaw: I tried the city, the mayor's office, the housing department, code enforcement. It was like shouting into a void. This was one of those cities, the kind that prided itself on being progressive, which translated, in practice, to letting weeds overtake every park in the name of native plants, and getting rid of loitering laws so indigents could camp out and smoke whatever they pleased on every corner. I envisioned my quiet street becoming a permanent open-air museum of found object art and human despair. My sanctuary compromised. I was stuck with the tent. I was stuck with the whole goddamned menagerie. Then, one day, I saw the signs, tacked to telephone poles, stapled to forgotten fence posts, even stuck to the cracked glass of bus stops. "Junkmen will take any junk. Call X6X." I'd glimpsed the figure a few times before, a stooped, almost spectral presence pushing a rickety cart laden with scavenged detritus, old tires, rusted pipes, bits of partially destroyed fences. What the junkman got out of it, I had no idea. No fee listed. That was the strangest part. Usually there was a catch, a hidden charge. My life had taught me there were no free rides. I was outside trying to coax Buster away from a particularly pungent patch of Cardinal's compost when I spotted that tattered figure, bent almost double, hammering another one of her crude signs onto a telephone pole at the end of the block. The late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows, making her seem even more skeletal. A cynical, impulsive thought, born of frustration, bubbled up. "Hey," I called out, my voice rougher than intended. "I got some junk you can take out." I jutted my thumb toward Cardinal's yard, toward the offending tent and its growing collection of urban sculptures. It was meant as a joke, a dark, cynical jest to an anonymous stranger, a release valve for my pent-up annoyance. The junkman paused, the hammer still in her bony hand, and slowly, with an unsettling, almost mechanical slowness, turned to look at me over a shoulder that seemed to be made of coat hangers. That's when I truly saw her. It wasn't a he at all. It was a she, if you could even call her that. Wild, coarse gray hair, the color of dirty snow, framed a face that was more caricature than human. Her skin was a network of deep, leathery wrinkles, stretched taut over sharp cheekbones. But it was her eyes and her mouth that truly disturbed me. Her lips were a shocking, unnatural ruby red, a stark splash of color on her cadaverous face. And her head, it wasn't quite right. It was like an owl's head, perched precariously on a neck that seemed too thin, too long, too flexible. I could have sworn that in that moment, it was about to keep turning, like a screw, twisting completely around. A cold shiver, not a physical cold, but a primal wrongness, traced its way down my spine. The air around her seemed to vibrate with a low hum, like an old, failing transformer. Then, those eyes, black, beady, unsettlingly intelligent, shifted from me to the tent in Cardinal's yard. Her head tilted, that unnatural angle once more. She spoke, her voice a dry, rasping sound, like gravel churning in a rusty barrel. The art or the artist? A snort of dark amusement escaped me. The absurdity of it, the morbid humor. Well, I said, leaning against my fence, a sarcastic grin splitting my face. If you can take the artist, please do. Been mucking up my view for a month now. I regretted the words almost immediately, a familiar prickle of my reluctant conscience. But it was too late. The words hung in the air, heavy and dark. I saw Sally's slight figure moving inside the tent, a flash of her silhouette against the nylon. My stomach churned. What the hell did I just say? The junkman just nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Then, she fixed those unsettling eyes on me again. Hey, I said, trying to shake off the creeping unease, trying to lighten the mood. How come you call yourself junkman if you're a woman? Her ruby lips curled into something that might have been a smile, or perhaps a rictus of something far older and less pleasant. It didn't reach her eyes. Better for business. No one will call an old woman to haul junk. Fair enough, I thought, and watched her finish hammering the sign, her movements economical and precise. She turned and began pushing her cart down the street, a gaunt, hunched silhouette against the setting sun. The unsettling feeling lingered, a metallic tang in the back of my throat. I told myself it was just a strange old lady, just another peculiar character in a long line of them. But my hand kept going back to my wristwatch, my thumb tracing the worn glass, a nervous tick. A few days later, Buster barked frantically from the living room, startling me awake. I'd been drifting in that hazy half-sleep that often plagued me, a fragmented nightmare of screaming and smoke clinging to the edges of my consciousness. My heart hammered against my ribs. It took a moment for me to orient myself, to realize Buster wasn't barking at a ghost, but at the sound of Cardinal's frantic, desperate cries. "Sally, Sally, where are you?" Her voice was raw, cracking with something akin to panic. I peered out my window. Cardinal was standing in the middle of her unruly yard, spinning in slow, frantic circles, her arms thrown wide. The tent was still there, a deflated, brightly colored lump. The art was still there too. Sally's grotesque eagle sculpture, with its fan blade wings still poised menacingly towards my porch. But Sally herself was gone, vanished, seemingly into thin air. I felt a surge of unadulterated relief, quickly followed by a dark, uncomfortable twist in my gut. Coincidence, I told myself. She finally packed up and moved on, probably tired of living in a perpetual yard sale. I walked out onto my porch, feigning concern. "Everything all right, Cardinal?" I asked, my voice as neutral as I could make it. Buster, sensing the tension, stayed close to my leg, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "It's Sally, she's gone." Cardinal wrung her hands. "She just vanished, but she left all her things. Her tent, her art. Maybe she just got worried about winter, I suggested, shrugging. Left the mess for you to clean up. My words were callous. I knew, but I'd learned long ago that a certain level of callousness was necessary for self-preservation. No, something's wrong. Cardinal's eyes were wide, her face pale. Did you see the junkman around here? I keep tearing down her posters. She's bad news. Haven't you heard the rumors? I shook my head, feigning ignorance. Rumors? I don't like to speak ill of people, Cardinal began, but her usual moral compass seemed to be wavering under the strain. But my friend Joan, she said her ex-boyfriend hated her dog and asked the junkman to take it. The next day it disappeared. Poof, gone. And the junkman left him one of those awful sculptures. Cardinal shuddered, pulling her cardigan tighter. She'll take anything. They say she uses some sort of witchcraft and takes a piece of your soul in exchange for disappearing the junk. There's all these extra terms and conditions written in invisible ink on her flyers. Look at them under a blacklight if you want to freak yourself out. My blood ran cold. A piece of your soul? I dismissed it immediately. Witchcraft, invisible ink, hokum, old wives' tales, a metaphor, at best. My cynical mind scoffed at such archaic notions. Still, a faint, unsettling echo of the junkman's voice, the art, or the artist, reverberated in my head. Cardinal kept talking, her voice thin with anxiety. I was going to call the city, but maybe we should just call the junkman to deal with the tent. Cheaper than renting a dumpster, I guess. She trailed off, her gaze lingering on the tent with a mixture of grief and revulsion. Huh, I said, non-committal. Inside, a strange, morbid curiosity was stirring. Later that evening, after the moon had climbed high and cast long, skeletal shadows across the street, I found it. Propped against my front step, nestled amongst the dead leaves, was a small, crude sculpture. It was a deer, crafted from twisted wire, bottle caps, and shards of iridescent plastic. It was ugly, strangely unsettling, and undeniably hers. Attached to it, with a single piece of masking tape, was a small, grimy card in cramped, spidery handwriting. It read, "Thanks for your business, junkman." A cold knot tightened in my stomach, a sense of perverse justice mixed with a chilling dread. What a creeper. I picked up the sculpture, its cheap material surprisingly heavy in my hand. The small, red eyes of the deer seemed to stare at me, accusingly. I stuffed the card into my wallet, the phone number on the back, a morbid souvenir. Cardinal eventually cleared away the tent, leaving her yard looking slightly less chaotic, though Sally's art remained. The eagle, particularly, remained poised, its discarded fan blade wings catching the sun at an angle that made it look truly menacing, as if ready to swoop down onto my porch and pluck out my eyes. It was a constant, ugly reminder of what had happened, and of my own dark jest, a constant irritant. I found myself staring at it almost every morning, a low hum of annoyance growing into a full-blown throb behind my eyes. Cardinal, in her misplaced sentimentalism, kept saying it exuded Sally's spirit and that she could decorate her yard however she wished. And that, in itself, was the problem. It was her choice, but it was my view. My piece. I hadn't planned to call the junkman. Not really, but the card was still in my wallet, the number burning a hole through the worn leather. The thought of how easy it had been for Sally to disappear, how effortlessly the nuisance had been removed, it gnawed at me. And that damned eagle, it felt like it was mocking me. One particularly frustrating afternoon, after a near miss with a kid on a skateboard who nearly wiped out Buster and then swore at me, I snapped. My grip on the phone was tight, my thumb hovering over the numbers. It's just garbage. I rationalized. A phone call can't hurt. I dialed. The phone rang once, twice, then clicked into a pre-recorded message, the same raspy voice devoid of human inflection. Leave a message explaining what junk you'd like removed. The fee is merely a small sliver of your soul. I scoffed out loud. Hilarious. A ridiculous, theatrical flourish for a cleaning service. I cleared my throat, forcing a casual tone. Yeah, hi. This is Leo Vance. I'd like to request removal of some art installations from the yard next door. The metal eagle, the crane, all of it. Consider it junk. I hung up quickly, feeling a strange mixture of shame and exhilaration. The next morning, it was gone. Every single piece of Sally's found object art vanished. The yard was still a mess, but the sculptures were nowhere to be seen. No trace, not even a disturbed patch of grass. Whoa! I stared at the empty space, a chilling awe creeping in. It was hokum, sure, but her cleaning powers were undeniably impressive. And I mean, all I had to do was make a phone call. It was just so easy. Too easy. That's when the truly dangerous thought began to take root. What else could she make disappear? I didn't mean to keep calling her. Not really. But once you realize a problem can simply vanish with a single phone call, the temptation becomes a corrosive acid, eating away at your good intentions. 2 doors down, an elderly couple had left 2 hulking, rusted appliances, a washer and a dryer, on their front lawn for months, slowly decaying, attracting rodents, making the whole street look like a junkyard, an eyesore, a blight, a civic menace. I called. They were gone the next morning, replaced by another of those crude, unsettling sculptures on my doorstep. This one a lopsided dog, its eyes made of rusty bolts. Thanks for your business. Then came the panhandlers. At the co-op where I did my occasional grocery shopping. They were a constant fixture, slumped against the brick wall, their signs begging for money, their eyes glazed over. They harassed customers, smelled of stale booze and desperation, and were clearly hurting local business. What were people like that, really? But trash, human refuse? They weren't contributing. They were taking. My hand hovered over the phone again, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. This is different. A small, desperate part of my conscience whispered, these are people. But the other part, the cynical, weary part, quickly argued back. They're a menace, a nuisance. They're making things worse for everyone. You're just cleaning up. The guilt was a dull ache, but the pull of convenience, the promise of quiet, was stronger. I called. I asked the junkman to clean them up. The next morning, the spots where they usually sat were empty. Other panhandlers drifted in a few days later, filling the void, their gaunt faces and desperate pleas echoing the ones that had vanished. I called again, and again. Each time, a new sculpture appeared on my step, a grotesque, silent tally of my transactions. A bird with bottle cap feathers, a coiled snake made of bicycle chains, a contorted human figure made of discarded doll's limbs. Each one seemed to pulse with a faint, disturbing energy, their materials whispering of what they once were. The human figures made me nauseous, the subtle twist in my gut growing sharper with each new acquisition. I moved on to other irritants. The unsightly graffiti that appeared on the park wall, scrawled by bored teenagers, defiling public space, gone. The dog owners who let their pets crap on the sidewalk without picking up, leaving landmines for unsuspecting pedestrians, gone. Even the gang of Kia-stealing teens that had been terrorizing the neighborhood, joyriding and causing chaos. One quick phone call and boom, no more stolen cars. Each time the junk man left her unsettling token, a small found object animal or figure, always with that chillingly polite note. Thanks for your business, junkman. Everything was great. The neighborhood, once sliding into a slow decay, seemed to be brightening, clearing. My street was quiet. The constant hum of annoyance had faded. My routines felt safer. I almost felt content, almost, because with each successful transaction, a deeper, colder space opened up inside me, a space where the faint echo of my conscience used to reside. The silence was less peaceful now, more unnerving, like the silence in an empty room after a scream has died. Until yesterday, I was nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee on my porch, enjoying the rare quiet, when I saw Cardinal marching towards my house, her face a thundercloud. Buster, sensing her agitation, whined softly at my feet. In her hand, clutched tight, was a small, crude sculpture of a dog. It took me a moment, my mind still half asleep, to realize she hadn't brought it from her yard. She'd picked it up off my front step, and attached to it was the junkman's usual grimy card. My blood ran cold. The coffee sloshed over my hand, but I barely felt it. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. The junkman. Cardinal's voice was a low growl, utterly devoid of her usual saccharine sweetness. Her eyes, usually so soft, were piercing, filled with a terrible accusation. "You've been calling the junkman, haven't you? Leo?" My mind raced, trying to formulate a denial, a distraction. "Now, hang on, Cardinal. Why does she leave Sally's sculptures for you as a calling card? Did you call her about Sally? Are you the reason Sally disappeared?" She took a step closer, her voice rising, sharp with fury. "I'm keeping this sculpture. Something to remember her, seeing as all the other art I had of hers out in my yard has gone missing, along with so many other things that, I guess, were junk to you." The implied accusation, the sheer scale of what she knew, hit me like a physical blow. The shame was scalding, immediately overridden by pure, unadulterated panic. She knew. She had the card. If she called first, if she called and told the junk man to take Pomenum Mamisunum. "Whatever happens," Cardinal shouted over her shoulder as she stormed off my porch, the dog sculpture clutched tight in her hand. "You brought this on yourself." The words echoed in the sudden silence, chilling me to the bone. "You brought this on yourself." She was right. Every step, every call, every vanishing act. I stumbled back inside, my hands shaking so violently I could barely unlock my phone. My mind was a whirlwind of frantic, primal fear. It was her or me. It had to be. It was always a matter of survival. I punched in the junkman's number, my thumb hitting the worn buttons with desperate force. The phone rang. Once, twice. It clicked into the voicemail. "Leave a message explaining what junk you'd like removed. The fee is merely a small sliver of your soul." "Her," I gasped, my voice barely a whisper, ragged and hoarse. "Cardinal, my neighbor. She's causing problems. She's a nuisance. Take her away." My voice broke on the last word. I hung up immediately, slamming the phone down on the table, the plastic vibrating with the force. I stood there, gasping, my chest tight, empty. The air in the room felt thin, suddenly cold. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. Buster whimpered, nudging my leg, his soft fur a shocking contrast to the icy dread coiling inside me. It was her or me. I had to do it. There was no other choice. That was the lie I told myself. That was the lie I clung to, even as the truth gnawed at the edges of my sanity. I barely slept. The next morning, I sat on my porch, eyes gritty, stomach churning. The air was thick with the unspoken. Buster sat beside me, his head resting on my knee, occasionally licking my numb hand. My wristwatch felt heavy, its steady tick-tock a mockery of my frantic thoughts. Then, I saw her. One of Cardinal's kids, a small girl with braids, bounced out of the front door, backpack swinging, and skipped off to the school bus as if everything were normal. My breath caught in my throat. Shit, I totally forgot about her children. A fresh wave of nausea washed over me. A few minutes later, Cardinal herself emerged, carrying a watering can, heading towards her garden. Her lips thinned when she noticed me, a tight, angry line. She deliberately looked away, overtly ignoring me, turning her back, still pissed, and also, still very much not disappeared. Why had the junk man not taken her away? The silence stretched, thick and oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the chirping of birds. My carefully constructed logic began to crumble. I called, leaving several increasingly desperate messages. My voice grew hoarse, my words tumbling out in a frantic, incoherent stream. Why hadn't she gone? Had the junkman not received my request? Had Cardinal called her first? Was the curse on me now? Finally, on my fifth call, the phone rang, and a raspy voice actually answered. It was her, the junkman. My stomach clenched into a hard, cold knot. Your messages were received, she said, her voice like sandpaper on bone. So what's going on? I demanded, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. Did Cardinal call first and ask you to junk me? The absurdity of it, even as I spoke the words, was almost comical, if it weren't for the ice in my veins. She has never called this number and never will, replied the raspy voice, utterly devoid of emotion. Okay. Well, can I ask why you didn't carry out my request? The fear was an icy grip around my throat. You have insufficient currency, said the voice, flat and matter-of-fact. Insufficient? Wait, but there's no charge, I exclaimed, a wave of indignation briefly overriding the fear. New fees? Now? But even as the words left my mouth, a memory flashed, the phrase repeated again and again on the voicemail, that I had dismissed each time. A small sliver of your soul? A low chuckle began on the other end, a dry, rustling sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth. It started soft, then grew, deepening, expanding, until it filled the phone line, filling my ears, vibrating through the bones of my skull. It didn't sound like an old woman's chuckle at all. It didn't sound remotely human as it explained. There is a charge. Each transaction has a small cost. You have made a number of transactions, Mr. Vance, and now you have insufficient currency. The voice trailed off now, dissolving into those terrible, awful peals of laughter that now seemed to be coming from the walls, from the very air around me, mocking, triumphant, absolute. The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand. I slammed it down onto the receiver, cutting off the sound, but the laughter echoed in my head, a chilling symphony of my own undoing. I sat there, frozen, the phone still vibrating on the table. The silence that followed was worse than any noise. It was the silence of a tomb. My breath hitched, a raw, ragged sound. Insufficient currency. I had dismissed it as a joke, a metaphor, but now it was stark, terrifying reality. Each time, a sliver, each time, a piece. My memories, my empathy, my very essence. Traded for quiet streets, for disappeared annoyances, traded for a fragile, temporary peace. How do I earn back my currency? Is there any way to reverse the charges? The question was a desperate, childish plea into an uncaring void. The answer, I knew, was no. There was no going back. The laughter echoed, a cold wind through a hollow place. Was this the price for surviving Sycamore Grove? For all the times I'd run and survived when others hadn't? Was every step I took, every breath I drew, just another payment towards a debt I didn't even know I owed? The irony was a bitter taste on my tongue. I had cleaned up the neighborhood, but in doing so, I had emptied myself. I was the last piece of junk, waiting to be collected, and I had no currency left to pay my way out of it. Buster nudged my hand, a warm, insistent presence, a stark reminder of the fragile, precious thing I had left to lose. My watch ticked, a relentless march towards an unknown, horrifying reckoning. Character count, 9-9-67. The blue and white cruiser sat like a discarded toy, its engine a silent lie, the faint shimmer of condensation on its windows betraying the frigid pre-dawn air. My breath hitched, a rusty nail in my throat, each inhale a jagged tear at my windpipe. On the hood, folded neatly, lay 2 police uniforms, empty and limp as a broken promise, the cold night teasing their fabric. They were gone, all of them, and the message, scrawled in what felt like my own blood on the steamy bathroom mirror, screamed its truth, echoing the universe's cruel joke. We are everywhere. We are everyone. No safe haven. The world, it seemed, wasn't just indifferent. It was a goddamn farm. And I was just another pig for the slaughter. Just like that place beyond the veil. No escape. Never any escape. It had started as it always did, with a quiet wrongness. A subtle shift in the familiar fabric of reality that only I, it seemed, was cursed to perceive. Just an hour earlier, I'd woken on my mother's couch, the worn leather of my jacket digging into my side, an unwelcome guest in a nightmare that was only just beginning to unfold its gruesome petals. My mother, bless her oblivious heart, was off on some cruise, probably sipping overpriced cocktails and complaining about the shuffleboard. I'd been house-sitting for her all week, a temporary anchor in a life lived perpetually adrift. The job was easy enough. Feed the cat, water the plants, pretend I was a normal person for a few days. Up until tonight, it had been the most peaceful stretch I'd had in months. A bland, unthreatening monotony I usually craved. Around 10 p.m. or so, my internal clock tried to tell me, a sound ripped through the quiet suburban night, jarring me from a fitful doze. It was static, not the gentle hiss of a faraway radio, but the raw, unadulterated shriek of white noise, escalating from a whisper to a deafening roar in a matter of seconds. My eyes snapped open, my heart already hammering against my ribs, a familiar terror coiling in my gut. I practically vaulted off the couch, my muscles tensing for a fight, a desperate flight, anything but this sonic assault. My gaze darted to the flat-screen TV across the room, its black mirror now a kaleidoscope of frantic, aggressive snow. I lunged, my fingers fumbling for the power button, desperate to silence the caterwauling banshee trapped within the speakers. The instant the screen flickered to black and the horrific noise evaporated, leaving behind a ringing void, my mind finally tried to catch up, like a broken old engine sputtering to life. Confusion, thick and unwelcome, immediately settled over me. I looked at the very couch I'd just abandoned. I didn't remember falling asleep there. In fact, I could have sworn, with the kind of certainty that usually precedes a profound wrongness, that I had been in her spare bedroom, tucked into the too soft mattress, attempting to coax some actual sleep from my exhausted brain. My hand instinctively went to my wrist, my thumb tracing the cool metal of my old analog watch, a grounding tick I developed somewhere between the snow-choked mountain pass and the endless highways. I wasn't checking the time. I was checking for some sliver of normalcy, some proof that the world hadn't quite abandoned its orbit, to shake off the lingering disorientation, or perhaps to simply avoid the creeping dread. I forced myself to examine the living room. It was a comfortable, if dated, space with 2 beige couches, one nestled against the far wall, facing the TV, and the other, my current perch, tucked under the wide bay window. My gaze swept over the familiar clutter, stacks of magazines, a half-finished crossword puzzle, a forgotten coffee cup. Then I saw it, on the window couch, where I had supposedly been sleeping, a crisp, white piece of paper, folded neatly in half. My brow furrowed. Nobody was supposed to be here, not even close. I walked over, my movements stiff, and picked it up. My fingers, calloused from years of gripping steering wheels and warehouse pallets, unfolded it to reveal cramped, almost childish handwriting. Chicken scratch indeed. Spot the differences? My lips curled into a mirthless smile. A prank. It had to be. I'd completely forgotten I'd given a spare key to Sarah a few weeks back. She was always trying to inject some much-needed fun into my perpetually grim existence. "All right, Sarah," I muttered, my voice a rough rasp in the sudden silence. "I'll play." I put the note down on the glass coffee table, trying to project an air of playful exasperation I didn't feel, and scoped out the entire room. The first thing that snagged my attention was my old, clunky desktop computer. It should have been on the small end table beside the wall-facing couch, a dusty monument to procrastination. Instead, it was on the floor, tucked against the baseboard, almost as if someone had just casually kicked it there. Odd, but not terrifying. Sarah was clumsy. The next thing I noticed made the air in the room feel suddenly heavy, thick with unspoken wrongness. My late grandmother's porcelain doll, that goddamn thing, it usually sat on a high, dusty shelf on the wall, a creepy sentinel collecting dust. Now, it was perched directly where my computer had been, its small, painted smile stretched unnaturally wide. I stared into its black, bead-like eyes, cold and vacant, which clashed sickeningly with its garish jester outfit. A prickle of unease, sharp and sudden, snaked down my spine. This wasn't just a creepy doll. This was a deliberate act, a violation. My gut, a loyal but weary oracle, screamed that something was profoundly, irrevocably wrong. It was the same icy dread that had settled in my bones in that quaint diner with Ethan. The feeling that beauty and normalcy were just a thin veneer over something unspeakable. Or when Olivia had smiled at me with those two bright eyes. This was the whisper of something deeply, domestically wrong. A familiar prelude to the chaos that always seemed to find me. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation, but my heart, thrumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs, already knew better. There was no rational explanation for the things that clung to my wake. No simple answers for the horrors that insisted on being part of my narrative. I tried to shake it off, to attribute it to Sarah's twisted sense of humor, but the skin on my arms crawled. My hand brushed against the pocket of my cargo shorts, an automatic gesture. When I sleep, I always keep my phone in my pocket, a lifeline, a window to the outside world, however tenuous. It wasn't there. I patted down my pockets again, then scoured the couch cushions, peered under the coffee table. Nothing. The phone was gone. "Okay, joke's over, babe," I yelled out, my voice sounding strained, a little too loud in the sudden, unnerving silence. My cynicism battled with a growing knot of genuine alarm. This wasn't Sarah. This was something else. I expected a playful giggle, a gotcha from a hidden corner. I expected anything but the response I got. After a few seconds of strained silence, a new sound erupted, not from the living room, but from my mother's bedroom, down the short hall, her ancient, crackling radio, which she only ever listened to for the morning news, suddenly blared to life. Big band music, loud and distorted, a cacophony of brass and drums that sounded less gleeful and more malevolent. The static, I realized with a jolt, had been a prelude. My immediate reaction, one I've never quite understood, was pure, unadulterated fury. Anytime I'm faced with an unexpected, jarringly loud noise, something in me snaps. It's a deep, primal anger that overrides fear. A trauma response I've never been able to trace back to its source, though a part of me always wonders if it's tied to that fire, that chaos from a lifetime ago. I sprinted down the hall, my worn leather jacket slapping against my back, my boots thudding on the thin carpet. I burst into my mother's room, a small, feminine sanctuary now polluted by the sonic assault. My hand reached for the volume knob on the old radio, my jaw tight with a primal need to silence it. I started yelling, for no real reason other than the pure, unadulterated rage that pulsed through my veins. What the hell is going on? Cut it out! Just as my fingers brushed the knob, a female singer's voice cut through the brassy din, clear and chilling despite the blare. Her words, sung with a lilting, almost playful cadence, twisted my stomach into knots. Buried alive, my screams I recall. Years went by. People came and they I slammed the volume knob, twisting it counterclockwise with a savage force that nearly ripped it off. The music, the voice, the dread, all died instantly. But my body moved on instinct. My mind screamed at me, a panicked internal voice clawing at my sanity. Turn it back on. Hear what the hell she was saying. The urge was overwhelming, a sickening fascination with the horror, a cursed curiosity. With a shaking hand, I twisted the knob just enough for the softest whisper of sound. It wasn't the woman's crooning or the big band. It was a popular, catchy pop song, generic and saccharine, playing at a barely audible hum, the kind of song you heard everywhere and never noticed. The transition was so abrupt, so seamless. It was almost more terrifying than the eerie lyrics. It spoke of a deliberate control, a playful cruelty. At this point, the whole spot the differences game had entirely slipped my mind, buried under layers of adrenaline and mounting dread. But when I turned around, it came back in a big, gut-wrenching way. My mother had 3 large, framed family portraits hanging above her bed, a triptych of smiling faces, all from happier, simpler times. But now, to my horror, my own face was conspicuously absent from each one. My head had been meticulously cut out of every photograph, leaving behind gaping oval voids where my smiling face should have been. The sheer, audacious threat of it, the chilling implication, didn't scare me the most. What truly sent a jolt of icy terror through my veins was the impossible precision, the surgical patience, the time someone had taken. They had carefully removed each picture from its frame, severed my head with what looked like an X-Acto knife, then painstakingly replaced the now mutilated photo back into the frame, re-securing it and rehanging it, perfectly straight. I had gotten into my bed, in the spare room, at 9:45 p.m. The door to my mother's room had been open all day, and I never once noticed anything odd. Not a sound, not a flicker of movement, not the scent of a stranger. It was the same sick feeling I'd gotten when I realized Mitch hadn't been Mitch at all, that the imposter had been living in the walls, breathing my air, watching me sleep. They had been inside, right under my nose, and I hadn't known. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My hand, the one not trembling, went to my watch again, its familiar weight a paltry comfort. I climbed onto her bed, the soft mattress feeling like a trap, to inspect the pictures better, a morbid curiosity overriding every instinct to flee. I needed to see how they'd done it, needed to understand the impossible. Boom! I nearly screamed, a choked, pathetic sound. I shit you not. What sounded like a gunshot, or perhaps a small, controlled explosion, echoed from across the hall, directly from my own room. The sheer, unexpected violence of the noise, the concussive force of it, scared me so badly that I lost my footing on the bed, tumbling forward, my hand outstretched in a desperate attempt to brace myself, slammed into the bed frame, then slid across the glass of one of the picture frames, now shattered from my fall. A sharp, searing pain shot up my arm as the broken glass bit deep into my palm. At this point, any sensible person would just leave, right? Any sane, self-preserving human being would have turned tail and bolted, screaming into the night. I knew I should have. My go bag, always packed and ready, was probably still by the door. My mind screamed at me to run, to sprint out of this nightmare house, this domestic tomb, but it felt like my body was being pulled, inexorably, towards my room, like an invisible string had been tethered to my chest, tugging me deeper into the abyss. It wasn't courage, it was a horrifying compulsion, a twisted form of my reluctant conscience. pulling me towards the source of the dread. Perhaps because a part of me, the part that hated itself, felt I deserved to see the next horror. With my back pressed against the cold wall of the hallway, a sliver of broken glass still embedded in my palm, I slowly, excruciatingly slowly, opened the door to my room. A shriek, raw and involuntary, tore from my throat when I saw what was inside. It wasn't just a few things moved around, not a simple spot the differences game. It was a complete, utter upheaval. Everything was changed. Every damn thing in that room had been moved to a different area, rearranged into a chaotic, incomprehensible tableau. My bed, usually neatly made, was now against a different wall. My dresser was overturned, clothes spilling out like guts. It was a deliberate act of violation, a grotesque mockery of order. But amidst the chaos, there was only one thing out of place in a new, terrifying way. A folded piece of paper sat on my pillow, pristine white against the rumpled fabric. I walked numbly towards it, the broken glass in my hand, a dull throb compared to the hammering of my heart. I unfolded the note. Let's get obvious. The handwriting was even worse than the previous note, almost frantic, as if scrawled in haste or intense excitement. As I put down the note, my gaze, drawn by an unseen force, drifted straight ahead. My bedroom is right next to our raised back porch, with sliding glass doors serving as the barrier between my sanctuary and the outside world. A knot the size of a bowling ball, cold and heavy, grew in my stomach as I looked at the small table on the porch, visible through the glass. Bob had been set up right in the middle of it. Bob. As a side job, my mother teaches CPR classes for the community, and Bob is one of the 7 life-size dummies we have for those sessions. He was supposed to be in the garage, stacked with his plastic brethren. Now, he was being propped up, eerily upright, by what looked like an old, rusty pipe jammed into his back. His rubber mouth, usually agape for artificial respiration, was now covered by a black leather ball gag, cinched tight, and worse, much worse, 2 gleaming, wickedly sharp hunting knives had been plunged into his plastic eyes, reflecting the dim porch light like malevolent stars. It was a mutilation, grotesque and deliberate, a horrifying tableau. But what scared me the most about Bob's performance was the message, scrawled crudely in red paint, or something that looked like it, on his torso. Locks couldn't keep us out. My blood ran cold. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. Not only had they been inside, not only had they meticulously rearranged and violated my space, but they had also done it with absolute impunity. The thought dragged me back to that empty, burned-out shell of a house in Sycamore Grove, the one I can barely remember, the one that should have protected my family. Locks, walls, doors. They meant nothing. They never had. Then, just as the full weight of that realization settled, I heard them, footsteps, under me, coming from the basement. My mouth slowly dropped open. A choked gasp caught in my throat. I froze, my every nerve ending screaming, trying to count the heavy, deliberate thuds. 1, 2, 3. From what I gathered in those 5 eternal seconds, 3 distinct sets of heavy, dragging footsteps were moving around down there, directly beneath me. Just like that, my body, usually so weary, kicked into a primal overdrive I hadn't felt since running from that hungry thing in the woods beyond the old farmhouse. No more reluctant conscience, no more morbid curiosity, pure, unadulterated survival. My go bag was probably still where I left it, but there was no time. I spun on my heel, sprinting out of my room, down the short hall, and towards the front door. Every fiber of my being screamed for open air, for escape. A cold sweat beaded on my forehead. I was scared out of my mind because the door to the basement, a heavy, bolted wooden slab, was practically beside the front door. They were between me and the only clear exit. My hand was already on the cold metal of the doorknob, twisting it, desperation clawing at my throat. I hadn't even looked out the peephole, hadn't registered anything beyond the blinding need to get out. But then I heard it, a low, gravelly voice, deceptively calm, from directly outside the door, just inches from my ear. "No, there's no leaving." I nearly got whiplash with how quickly my neck snapped upwards. My gaze shot to the front door's small, rectangular window, the kind you'd find on a suburban house. Standing there, silhouetted against the weak glow of the street lamp, was a very built person. They wore a plain blue mechanic's outfit, pristine and unblemished, and a stark, featureless white mask. The kind of blank, empty mask that chills you more than any ghoulish grin. It was too perfect, too clean, like the skin on Olivia's carpet, so neatly arranged, so horrifyingly human. It seemed like the 5 seconds we locked eyes through that pane of glass stretched into 5 hours, a lifetime of frozen terror. The blankness of the mask was a void, absorbing all light, all hope. But this person, this entity, broke that illusion of stasis when he suddenly, casually, slammed his fist into the door's window. Not only did this send a jolt of pure terror through my chest, giving me a mini heart attack, but it also produced a spiderweb of cracks across the glass. The thought of that blank-faced man, so easily breaching my last barrier, coming into my house, into my mother's house, into this space that was supposed to be safe, snapped me fully into survival mode. There was no fear to freeze me up, only a chilling, desperate clarity, an almost mechanical assessment of threat and escape to help me live through this. As I'm writing this, huddled in the borrowed warmth of a neighbor's guest room, I still don't know why I did what I did next. My lips, cold and numb, curled upwards. I smiled right at the man, a wide, unsettling grin, a desperate, defiant act of absurdity in the face of absolute terror. I knew that at least 4 men were either in my house or trying to get in, that the odds were stacked impossibly against me, but I smiled right into his damn blank face. It was the only shred of control I had left, a final middle finger to the cruel, indifferent universe that seemed determined to break me. Then, without breaking eye contact for another agonizing second, I turned around and started sprinting towards the back door. I could hear the man on my front porch yell, "Fuck!" as if he hadn't expected me to react, hadn't anticipated my suicidal defiance. Good. Let him be surprised. The back door, it felt miles away. My lungs burned, air rasping in and out, the smell of dust and old fear filling my nostrils. Once I reached the back door, yanking at the old deadbolt, I heard the heavy basement door creak open behind me, followed by a torrent of heavy, stomping footsteps. Closer now, gaining on me. But before they could even all get out of that damn door, I was already halfway down my backyard porch steps, clumsy and desperate. The cool night air hit my face, sharp and invigorating. Once I reached the bottom, I risked a glance behind me. The large, rusted gate that led into my backyard, usually bolted shut, was wide open, swaying slightly on its hinges. And standing in the gaping maw of the opening, silhouetted by the distant streetlights, was the man from earlier, the one in the mechanic's outfit and the white mask. This time, he was brandishing a baseball bat, its dark gleam a promise of bone-shattering pain. I didn't even look again to see if he was chasing me, didn't wait to see if the others had spilled out of the house. I just ran. I sprinted towards my back fence, a rickety wooden barrier that separated my property from a patch of dense, neglected woods. My muscles screamed, but I launched myself, scrambling over the top, the rough wood scraping my already cut palm. I landed hard on the other side, a painful thud, and immediately started screaming for help, my voice raw and hoarse, tearing through the suffocating silence of the night. I barely registered the small patch of woods behind my house, the gnarled trees reaching like skeletal fingers. But luckily, by some miracle, a few teenagers were there, huddled around a dying bonfire, chugging hard iced tea and probably getting up to no good. My frantic screams, my disheveled appearance, and the terror plastered across my face must have been convincing enough. It didn't take much of my incoherent, panicked story to convince them to let me use their phone. The only girl there, a blonde with wide, shocked eyes, shoved hers into my trembling hand. I fumbled with it, dialing 911, my fingers slick with sweat and blood. I explained everything, the whole unbelievable, sanity-shattering nightmare, to the operator. She was calm, professional, telling me that squad cars were on their way, but that none of us were safe out in the open. "Find shelter, sir, immediately." So with a nod to the teenagers, we all ran, a desperate, terrified huddle, towards my neighbor's house. If you're reading this, Daryl, thank you for letting us in. You probably think I'm insane, but you let us in. The cops arrived 4 minutes later, sirens wailing, lights flashing, a brief, fragile beacon of hope in the darkness. They swept the house before doing anything else, guns drawn, flashlights cutting through the gloom. They didn't find anybody there. No blank-faced mechanic, no silent accomplices, no sign of the 3 sets of footsteps from the basement, but they did find a bunch of horrifying tools set up down there. The sheriff, a big man with weary eyes, described them in vague, chilling terms. Restraints, sharpening stones, some kind of staging area. They assumed that I must not have been paying attention to the basement much, that I was just a negligent house sitter who missed a meticulous home invasion. I tried to reassure them, tried to argue, my voice cracking with desperation. "That's impossible," I insisted. "I went down there today, around 8:30 p.m., to play Xbox. It was empty. There was nothing." The sheriff shook his head, a gesture of tired disbelief. "That's impossible, son. The whole setup they had down there would have taken at least 3 hours to put together. Minimum. The time frame of the crime didn't add up for any of us. A gaping void in the narrative that defied logic. They also questioned how I didn't wake up when I was supposedly moved from my bed to the couch, or when they rearranged my entire house. Talking to them honestly felt like a really bad nightmare sequence from a David Lynch movie, a surreal, Kafkaesque interrogation. It didn't feel real. None of it did. The police, who weren't for all their authority, couldn't grasp the true nature of the violation. They saw a break-in. I saw the unraveling of reality. I'd dealt with authorities before. After that phantom hitchhiker incident, after the things I'd seen on the road, they always looked at me like I was a liar or a lunatic. Always. Most of the cops left around 11:45 p.m., leaving behind a single squad car parked outside in my driveway, a silent, blue and white guardian in case I needed them. I convinced my mom to stay on her cruise, assuring her everything was fine, that it was just some vandals. I felt a fragile sense of safety with the cop car sitting there, its presence a thin shield. Besides everything being moved, things felt relatively normal now, a strange, eerie calm after the storm. Until I entered the bathroom. It was a room where I hadn't spotted the difference. I hadn't dared. It was my last bastion of normalcy, or so I hoped. The fluorescent light hummed, casting a sterile glow. Then my eyes found the floor. Soap was all over it, like some deranged cleaner had gone wild. My shower curtain, a simple floral print, was shredded into long, hanging strips, like bloody ribbons. My breath caught. I saw a glint of white behind the toilet. My phone, the missing phone, it was there, wrapped neatly, meticulously, in toilet paper. And then I saw it, painted on the steamed-up mirror, in that same atrocious, desperate hand, was the final message. The punchline to the universe's cruelest joke: we are everywhere. We are everyone. No safe haven. I audibly said, "How the fuck?" The words were barely a whisper, a broken plea. My mind raced, trying to process it. Why wasn't this told to me by the police? Why was this room not brought up at all during their sweep? Had they missed it? Or had it happened after they left? A fresh wave of paranoia, colder and sharper than anything I'd felt tonight, washed over me. The cop car, the sense of safety. It was a lie. It was always a lie. My heart began to race again, a frantic hummingbird trapped in my chest. I ran, stumbling, into my living room, my gaze fixed on the front window. The squad car still sat in my driveway, a silent, mocking testament to my foolish belief in external protection. But it was empty. Nobody was in it. Instead, those two police uniforms, freshly folded, sat on the hood, catching the first pale light of dawn. They were an offering, a warning. I tried calling 911 again, my fingers fumbling with the toilet paper-wrapped phone, but it wasn't working. Dead. No signal. My neighbors, Daryl and his wife, weren't home, even though they had been 30 minutes ago. 30 minutes. Enough time for anything to happen. I'm not trying to write a cliche, the author dies at the end story, because right now, as the sun begins to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in sickeningly cheerful hues, I'm very much alive. My hand throbs, my muscles ache, and my mind feels like shattered glass. But I'm worried that I won't be for much longer. If I somehow survive this, I want to share my story. I want to ask all of you, out there in the vast, indifferent darkness, if you have ever been in a situation like this one where everything almost feels normal, where the pieces seem to fit, but in fact, everything, every subtle change, every deliberate violation, every single second of it seems to be contributing to your death. This isn't just a house invasion. This is a message, and I am its unwilling recipient. Character count 987.